My fusion system. Fusing 1,000 chickens at the start. Chapters 382 to 389. Chapter 382. Taking things a little too far. Augustus looked at the man and woman in front of him with great interest. He was not in a good mood that day, so he invited Casey and Lana to dinner. The reason for his bad mood was very simple. The Campbell family had received a piece of news the previous day, which told them that the Sword Saint had accepted a disciple. It had been nearly 10 years since Reed had last accepted a disciple. As the strongest person in the kingdom, it was not a small matter for Reed to get a disciple. Furthermore, the Campbell family had also found out that the disciple was the youth that Antonio had brought back from the border. The young man had become the disciple of two famous people in the kingdom. Even the Campbell family had to praise Watson's luck. The head of the family even issued an order requesting their descendants to contact Watson and rope that genius into their fold. Augustus was not happy about that matter. He had not tried to get Antonio and the Sword Saint to be his master, but they had rejected him. He was the Campbell family's top genius, but he had run into a wall in front of two powerful people. In the end, those two people were fighting over Watson. Did that mean he was inferior to Watson? How could he bear that thought? Lady Swordmistress and the young man who displayed his might at His Majesty's banquet yesterday. I didn't expect you to sit together for a meal. It seems like the news of the Sword Saint accepting a disciple is true. By the way, Watson, where's the unicorn you took? Why didn't you bring it with along? Did it die from too much corruption? Augustus gave Christina and Watson a playful smile as he licked his lips. Those familiar with him knew that he only licked his lips when his heart was filled with killing intent. He felt even more furious when he saw Watson and Christina sitting together while the top masters rejected him and other members from the Archduke's families. The Sword Saint family's status surpassed the three Archdukes, who were more powerful. As the future heir to the Campbell family, his status was higher than Christina's. He knew that Christina did not have the right to sit here, she was only there because of Watson. Watson is only starting to get famous in the capital, and that tavern has already started to rope him in. How foolish. Who knows how long that illusory fame will last? Perhaps today, or perhaps in the next second, that fame will cease to exist. Augustus' face was brimming with pride. Who are you? Watson glanced at Augustus and quickly averted his gaze. He remembered seeing that red-haired youth the previous day, but he did not have much of an impression. As for the unicorn, it had attracted too much attention by his side. Therefore, he had left it in the care of the Severed Fingers gang. Watson's gaze fell on Casey and Lana. Young Master Casey and Miss Lana, long time no see. I didn't expect to see you in the capital. Casey's body trembled. At that moment, he was clearly much better than when he was in the floating city. Other than bandages on his hands, his movements were a little stiff, but no wounds were seen anywhere else. Didn't we just meet at His Majesty's banquet? He muttered softly, as if afraid that Watson would hear him. Watson put on a smile and said, Watson, thanks to you, my father let me leave the Ptolemy family and enter the Royal Academy to see the world. I'm pleased to see you again. As for Augustus and I, we've known each other for a long time. Augustus had visited the floating city, and I even invited him to the Crystal Palace. This time, it's his turn to treat me to a meal. Casey, why are you explaining so much to that person? I heard that you had a conflict with him, right? Don't worry, I will avenge you. Augustus, when have I ever said that? Augustus' words caused Casey's expression to change. He had Lana by his side and the bodyguards to supervise him, so he could not do anything terrible there. He also had to train constantly if he wanted to pass the Royal Academy's assessment. It was the same for Augustus, a young master from one of the Archduke's families. The main culprit behind his suffering in the floating city was Watson. Over the past 2 days, he had said many things to Augustus, but he did not dare admit it in front of Watson. Watson, Augustus is only joking. I didn't say those words, definitely not, Casey explained in fear and trepidation. Then, he extended his right hand and pointed 3 fingers at the sky. I swear, really? But, Casey, didn't you say that you wouldn't have had to come to the capital if not for Watson? You even cursed him to die. Did I mishear you? Lana asked as she touched her lips. However, she did not look at Casey, she kept her eyes on Christina. Casey's knees almost buckled, and the look on his face became more and more terrified. He said, No, I didn't say that. At the same time, he looked at Lana in disbelief. Lana, how could you say that about me? I'm your brother. Get lost, you weakling. Augustus was disgusted by Casey's behavior. He kicked Casey and stood in front of Watson. More than a dozen noblemen behind him also looked at Casey with disdain. If it were not for Casey's identity, they would have mocked him then. Watson was only Antonio and the Sword Saint's disciple. Did Casey have to be so polite toward him? It was embarrassing to see the young man bow toward another person, disregarding the etiquette of the nobleman. Watson, this is my usual dining place. Now I'm here with my friends to eat. Please leave, otherwise I'll make you leave. Augustus stretched out his right hand. A burst of fire erupted from his hand, releasing a silent threat. Lady Swordmistress, let's go. Watson sighed and stood up. He was no longer in the mood to eat. He would not argue with that kind of person. However, the other party did not intend to let him go. Wait, Watson, I only asked you to leave. I did not say to let Miss Christina leave as well. As the Sword Saint's daughter, Miss Christina is qualified enough to eat with us. Does that mean that I'm the only one who is not qualified to eat here? It looks like you're not stupid at all. Augustus had a playful smile on his face. So, do you plan to leave? Augustus, don't go too far. Watson is my guest. I invited him to eat here today. You're disrespecting me by chasing him away. If that's the case, Watson doesn't need to do anything. I'll be your opponent. Christina could not stand it any longer. She stood up. She had not gotten any useful information from Watson yet, and Augustus and the others had already chased him away. Would that not be a huge loss for her? Augustus's face darkened when he heard that, and a trace of coldness appeared in his eyes. Miss Christina, it seems like I've brought that upon myself. I don't like to fight with women other than that cold woman from the Saint Laurent family. I hope that you won't become the second person for me to hunt. Plus, it looks like someone is keeping quiet. It's quite unmanly to hide behind a woman. Young Master Augustus, calm down. Let's eat in another dining area. Watson is not human. He's a monster. There's no benefit in angering him. Casey stood up and comforted Augustus. You're so annoying. Get out of my way. I've provoked him today. Let's see what he can do to me. Platinum Tier Fire Elemental Spell. Roaring Ancient Fire Python. Augustus clenched his fist at Watson impatiently. The flames in his right hand instantly exploded. Its size expanded by 100 times, and a 10-meter-long fire python appeared in the air. Its tail twitched gently, leaving a scorched mark on the ground. The fangs in its huge mouth were visible, and some of the tables, chairs, and benches in the room were on fire. Young Master Augustus is angry. Retreat. More than 10 noblemen seemed to be quite familiar with Augustus' behavior. Those who knew him well retreated out of the room. They could avoid getting hurt, and they could also stop people from trying to help. After summoning the fire python, Augustus did not care about the people around him at all. He waved his hand at Watson, and the fire python immediately swung its tail at Watson. Watson moved a few meters backward, muttering, "Phew, that was close." After patting his clothes, the table in front of him was smashed into pieces by the python's tail. It turned into ashes on the ground. This room is only so big. Let's see where you can hide. Platinum Tier Spell. Roaring Ancient Fire Python. Augustus had a sinister smile on his face. He stretched his left hand outward, and a similarly huge fire python appeared in the room. The two pythons intersected, and flames kept spewing out of their mouths. That time, it was not just tables and chairs. The flames ignited even the floor and ceiling. The temperature of the crimson flame was extremely high. It could even melt gold-grade ores. The small room seemed to have instantly turned into a fiery purgatory. As molten lava flowed everywhere on the floor and walls, the entire room and the tavern would be burned to ashes at that rate. Watson's expression finally changed from relaxed to serious. Aren't you taking things a little too far? As soon as his voice fell, he took a step forward and allowed the two fire pythons to reach toward him. Their mouths tore down on him. Crack! The fire pythons touched Watson's body with a crisp sound, but they did not cause any harm. Instead, the two pythons seemed to have discovered something terrifying, and their bodies collapsed with mournful wails. How is this possible? Augustus' face paled, his body swayed, and suddenly, he found Watson's figure disappearing from his face. Where is he? A sense of crisis rose in Augustus' heart. He wanted to turn back, but it was too late. A tender hand reached out from behind him, grabbed his head, and pressed him to the ground. Boom! With a muffled sound, a pit with a radius of several meters appeared on the ground. Augustus was covered in blood as he fell into the hole. Long snake-like cracks spread outward from the pit. Chapter 383. Fear of Watson's dominance. Watson grabbed Augustus' head and pressed his entire body to the floor. His expression was calm. What, young Master Augustus was defeated? Truly? I know that Watson is Antonio and the Sword Saint's disciple. He must be very powerful, but I did not expect him to be so powerful. Augustus's followers were discussing among themselves, their faces filled with disbelief. They were all noblemen in the royal city. Due to family reasons or other factors, they were prepared to get close to Duke Campbell. They knew Augustus very well. Usually, Augustus was an overbearing person. As long as it was something he wanted to do, he would do it no matter what. If there were no place for him to eat, Augustus would hit the person who occupied his table. Everyone thought that the result would be the same as before. They did not expect Augustus to be pressed to the ground instead. "DMN it, let go of me. Otherwise, I will turn you into charcoal." Augustus raised his hand to wipe the blood off his face. His eyes reddened as he spoke harshly to Watson. As the Campbell family's top member, he could do whatever he wanted in the entire capital. Those he taught a lesson could only consider themselves unlucky, even if they were noblemen. When had they ever suffered such a loss? While he was unhappy, Augustus was also a little surprised. Even though the platinum tier magic he used on Watson was not his full strength, its power was not weak either. Watson had been able to withstand it so easily, so he must be a platinum tier elite, at least. So what if you're a platinum tier elite? You still have to bow at my feet, Augustus muttered to himself. Then, a scarlet light flashed in his reddened eyes. Two long curved horns grew from the top of his head. Those two curved horns looked like dragon horns. A ball of golden red flames floated in the middle of the two horns. It seemed to have a life of its own, constantly changing its shape. A pair of wings covered in scales emerged from Augustus' back, which was also made of flames, extended outward and pushed Watson away. The fire python was wrapped around Augustus' body. The clothes on his body were burned to ashes, revealing his strong muscles. Mysterious red patterns extended from his chest area to his entire body. "Watson, you're the second person to force me into this form, other than that annoying girl from the Saint Laurent family, Nia. You should be proud of yourself. This is my second form, the Flaming Dragon. Under this form, I can temporarily advance to Platinum tier. Do you know why I was assigned to the warrior class even though I have a Platinum tier spell?" After transforming, Augustus' voice became low and hoarse. "I'm sorry, I don't want to know." Watson was very calm. When the noblemen saw that scene, their expressions were filled with shock and a hint of fear. Young Master Augustus had released his second form. They say that when Augustus was young, he went out hunting with the head of the Campbell family and encountered an ancient hellfire dragon that had just awakened. The Campbell family's followers killed that dragon. The head of the family smeared the dragon's blood on Augustus's body, allowing him to possess the blood of a dragon. "Let's leave this place quickly. Since young Master Augustus has released his second form, then this situation will surely escalate. I'm afraid the entire Holy Dragon Tavern will be burned to the ground." More than 10 noblemen discussed among themselves and quickly retreated outside. Augustus' dragon form allowed him to possess strength that was not inferior to a real dragon. The magic that Augustus released during the Academy's assessment was not the usual human magic but dragon magic. Dragons were not only good at close combat but also magic. Those were collectively known as the power of dragons. Therefore, it was not against the rules for Augustus to release magic during the warrior assessment. That terrifying power had descended in front of Watson. The illusory gigantic dragon with craters on its body appeared behind Augustus. It lowered its huge head and let out a terrifying roar at Watson. Every fang in its mouth was red and filled with a scorching aura. "Watson, even if you're afraid now, it's already too late. Unless you kneel and beg for mercy, otherwise." Augustus stood under the illusory gigantic dragon in a dignified manner and sneered at Watson. "Otherwise, what? I won't let you off so easily. I'll break all the bones in your body, then hang you up and put you outside the tavern." I'll let all the passers-by see your miserable appearance and let them know that Antonio and the Sword Saint's disciple is very average. If you can do it, just give it a try." Watson's expressionless response made Augustus snort coldly. "Watson, since you're still holding on, then I won't be polite. The Hellfire Dragon was a peak Platinum tier dragon when it was alive. You probably haven't seen a dragon of that level before, right?" "Oh, right, I almost forgot. You came from the remote border. You probably haven't seen an ordinary dragon. Hellfire Dragon, tear him apart." After giving the order to the Hellfire Dragon, the illusory beast immediately spread its wings and flew in front of Watson. The crater-shaped holes on its body shot out scorching flames. At the same time, it opened its huge mouth. Its razor-sharp teeth had a fiery red color as if it wanted to bite Watson's neck. "I've never seen a Platinum-tier dragon before because..." Watson stopped mid-sentence. The Hellfire Dragon's huge head came right above his head. "All the dragons I've seen are at least Diamond tier." Roar, roar. Two different illusory dragons suddenly appeared behind Watson. That was the power of the contracted magical beast that he had summoned using the druid's secret skill. The two dragons were not as complete as the one Augustus had summoned. Only half a head appeared, but that half a head was even more terrifying than a full dragon. The space was crushed and shattered by an unknown force as silver white and black vertical pupils revealed themselves. One eyeball was the size of a house, and around the eyeball were diamond or pitch black scales. The nebula and the black fog that symbolized death were wrapped around them, respectively. Watson had raised two dragons, the Diamond Star Dragon and the Death Omen Star Dragon. At that moment, the power of those two dragons descended at the same time. The pressure from their eyes made the Hellfire Dragon that was biting Watson's head wail in pain, and its body collapsed while trembling. "That is the power of the dragon race. Why do you also have their power?" "That's impossible." Augustus, who had been very arrogant, suddenly paled. "Nothing is impossible. Not only do I have the power of the dragon race, but I can also transform into a giant dragon." As Watson spoke, he took a step forward. Black and white scales grew on his body. One of his eyes turned silver white while the other turned black. Even his eyebrows and eyelashes were dyed the same color, and the 12 completely different wings on his back spread open. 4 pitch black stars danced above his head, and bright starlight flowed under his feet. At that moment, Watson had transformed into half a Diamond Star Dragon and half a Death Omen Star Dragon. That dragon form was many times more brilliant and powerful than Augustus' dragon, which only had curved horns and red patterns. After transforming into a dragon, Watson did not hesitate. He arrived in front of Augustus at a breakneck speed. He lifted his hand and strangled Augustus's neck, slamming him to the ground. Bang! Augustus spat out a mouthful of blood. His body was once again covered in wounds. The red patterns and the dragon horns on his head gradually faded away. That meant Augustus' dragon form had been broken. The nobleman, who had been preparing to escape when Augustus activated his second form, heard the loud sound behind them. They turned their heads to look. They were shocked when they realized that the person lying on the ground was not Watson but Augustus. They stopped in their tracks. Soon, they saw an even more shocking scene. After Watson threw Augustus to the ground, he did not give him a chance to resist. He reached his hand outward and grabbed Augustus' neck, smashing him into the ground. He did that more than 10 times until Augustus' limbs became limp and his eyes blurred. At the last moment, Watson stopped. He grabbed Augustus' messy long red hair and dragged his body out. During that process, a long red, bloodied scar was left on the ground. The Campbell family's successor and Watson had a conflict after coming out for a meal. That is really troublesome. Also, what did Watson do? It doesn't seem like magic or fighting skills. Does he have other abilities? Christina did not say a word when Watson was beating Augustus. In her opinion, the outcome had long been decided. The reason she did not stop him was that Augustus had been very arrogant. She also wanted to beat him up to vent her anger. "Watson, what are you doing? It's about time. Augustus will die if we continue fighting." After thinking for a while, Christina threw those thoughts to the back of her mind and shouted at Watson, who was walking outside. "Don't worry, Lady Swordmistress. I know what I'm doing. This guy won't die." Watson grabbed Augustus. He had just arrived at the dining hall and caused a sensation. "Isn't that the Campbell family's young master, Augustus?" How did he get beaten up to such a state and even get caught? Who beat him up? Does he want to die? A nobleman saw that tragic scene. He hurriedly got up from his seat and even forgot to wipe his mouth. Another table of customers carefully identified Augustus and Watson. They said, "The youth who beat him seems to be Antonio and the Sword Saint's disciple. I don't know what happened between him and Augustus. Why did they fight? But no matter what happens, it's better for us to stay out of the matters between big shots like them. If they did not get involved, then it would not affect them." All the customers in the hall watched nervously as Watson, in his dragon form, dragged Augustus, who was covered in blood, out of the tavern and threw him into the sky. Augustus' body flew up limply until it got stuck on the plaque. After doing all that, Watson clapped and deactivated his dragonification. He said, "The most outstanding genius of the Campbell family, doesn't look like much." Originally, Augustus had said those harsh words to him. Augustus also said that he would make a fool of Watson by hanging him on the plaque. So, Watson decided to help Augustus to fulfill that wish. "I told you not to provoke Watson. Watson is a monster without common sense. It's useless to tell him about the nobleman's etiquette. He won't care whether you are the descendant of the count or the duke. As long as you provoke him, he will beat you up." Casey stood with more than 10 noblemen. When they saw Casey, they glanced at his right hand, which was covered in bandages, and then looked at the door with a hint of pity. Lana stood behind him. She stroked her lips with her fingers, her gaze fixed on Watson. "As expected, Watson is still the person I remember. He does as he pleases and has no fear. It seems like I won't be bored in the capital. Watson, isn't that inappropriate?" While the people around were whispering, Christina took the opportunity to walk to Watson's side and lowered her voice. "What's so bad about it? Augustus is the Campbell family's young master, after all. He's also the genius who is most likely to inherit the Campbell family in the future. If you hit him, it's equivalent to disrespecting his family. What do you think they'd do?" "Lady Swordmistress, your words have reminded me that respect is crucial for a nobleman." Watson nodded modestly and politely. Before Christina could let out a sigh of relief, he turned around and bowed to everyone in the restaurant. "Everyone, I'm sorry to disturb your meal. I'm here to announce something. This is purely a personal grudge. It has nothing to do with the Campbell family." "Hey Watson, did I tell you to do that? I told you to let Augustus go." Christina frowned. "Of course, we have to let him go, but not now." Watson waved his hand and called for the person in charge of the reception in the pub. "Wait for the Campbell family to come here. Ask them to compensate for the damages to the Holy Dragon pub. Then I will consider letting him go. When this place is repaired, we will let him go. Do you understand?" "I understand, young Master Watson." The maid was the woman who had just taken Watson and Christina to the Red Dragon dining area. "If that's the case, then it's fine. Lady Swordmistress, let's go somewhere else to eat." Watson nodded to the maid and left the Holy Dragon Tavern with Christina. In the process, Christina looked at Watson and the maid suspiciously. She felt that the relationship between Watson and the maid was not ordinary. Watson spoke in a commanding tone, and the maid of the tavern was very respectful to Watson. She even readily agreed to the order that would offend the Campbell family. Does Watson and the people from the tavern know each other? That thought appeared in Christina's mind, but she quickly dispelled it. Watson had never been to the capital, so how could he know the people in the Holy Dragon Tavern? The reason the maids in the tavern were so respectful to Watson might have been led by Watson's fame and the strength he displayed. While Watson and Christina were in the Holy Dragon Tavern, the two older gentlemen were somewhere nearby. They were in another tavern in a hidden alley. "Antonio, is there anything you haven't told me about Watson? Explain it to me right now." Reed held half a glass of red wine and shook it gently. He looked at the young man with platinum hair, leaning on a cane with a depressed expression. That tavern was a place that Reed and Antonio often frequented. The environment was perfect, and there were not many guests. The two of them had used a simple disguise when they went out, so no one recognized them. Antonio, who was disguised as a dark-skinned, ordinary-looking young man, smiled. "Reed, it seems that Watson has also punished you. When I told you that Watson's learning ability was very strong, you ridiculed me and said that the things I taught were too simple. Do you still feel that way now?" Antonio cheered in his heart. That was great. Finally, someone could understand him. The greatest mage in the kingdom, who had countless disciples, was repeatedly frustrated when he taught Watson. A monster who can learn everything at once and can even refine it to a higher level. Anyone who has such a disciple would feel uncomfortable. He learned the kingdom of the sword in just one day from understanding just half of the sword technique. It's a starlight tier technique. If this goes on, he might surpass me in 2 to 3 days. I will lose my reputation as a sword saint. Reed sighed. He had fought with Antonio for a long time. No matter what it was, the two of them always held opposite views. However, they had reached an agreement on the question about Watson. Antonio, it must have been hard for you to be a teacher for that monster for a few years. How did you do it? Do you want to hear it? If you want to hear it, give me another bottle of 20-year-old red wine. 20-year-old red wine? You're really asking for a lot. A normal bottle is worth a few thousand gold coins. Even if the tavern is holding an event, a bottle of red wine of the same quality can only be sold for 500 gold coins. That's still not a small amount. As Reed spoke, he downed the red wine in his glass in one gulp and clicked his tongue. Speaking of which, I come to this tavern several times a month. Their wine was clearly not as good. The wine is exquisite, but the price has also become much cheaper. It's even comparable to the most famous Lafayette winer. Did the tavern get some good recipes? I don't know what kind of good recipe the tavern has. I only know that if you don't give me any wine, you won't know how I've been Watson's teacher for a few years. Glaring at Antonio, Reed beckoned for the waiter to bring a bottle of new 20-year-old red wine and patted the bag of 500 gold coins on the table. Well, can you tell me now? The solution is very simple. I just need to reduce the number of things that I teach Watson every day. For example, if I mastered 1,000 spells, then I can only teach one a day or even once a week. Anyway, no matter how much I teach Watson, he will be able to learn it. So, why don't I teach him less? Then, I can be his master for a long time. Yes, why didn't I think of such a simple solution? Reed took the red wine that he had pushed in front of Antonio. Your method is too simple. I don't think it's worth the price of this bottle of wine. The bet doesn't count. You're shameless, Reed. You went back on your word. Originally, I only wanted to tell you more about Watson on account of your treat. Then, I won't tell you anymore. Antonio slammed on the table angrily. In return, Reed's disdain was reciprocated. Other than telling me to be a long-term master, what else can you teach me? Antonio's eyes were filled with pity. Reed, you don't know much about Watson. You don't know how many spells I can teach him every day, but thinking about that is actually the easiest thing. You might not understand now, but it won't be long before you understand the fear of Watson's dominance. Chapter 384. Going to the Campbell family. The fear of being controlled by Watson? Antonio, don't scare me. I'm a sword saint. How can a child control me? Reed did not believe Antonio's words. He did not care about it. At that moment, the tavern door where the two of them were drinking was suddenly pushed open. A group of people wearing noble clothes rushed in. Quick, search this area for me. We just received news that the Campbell family's young master, Augustus Campbell, was bullied by someone named Watson in the Holy Dragon Tavern. Not only was he bullied, but that person also broke his limbs and hung him on the tavern's plaque. Master has given an order. We must find Watson today. Take him back to the Campbell family and hack him into pieces. That person called Watson had left after beating him up. According to intelligence, he is currently eating at a restaurant in the capital. Listen well, if you have any leads on Watson, you must inform us immediately. The Campbell family has a great reward for you. Oh, right, that Watson looks like this. More than 10 people dressed in noble clothing had rushed into the tavern. Besides the person in the lead taking a portrait of Watson from his clothes and loudly announcing it to the diners in the tavern, the others had split up. They quickly searched the entire tavern in a way that did not disturb others. After they were done, they returned to the leader's side and shook their heads, indicating that they did not find the target. Leave someone here to guard this place. Let's go to the next tavern. The leader looked like he had already searched many restaurants and did not feel disappointed. He turned around, left one person behind, and quickly left the restaurant with the rest of the people. Watson beat Augustus and hung him in the Holy Dragon Tavern? What's going on? After those people left, Reed muttered to himself in disbelief. Antonio, who was next to him, sighed, his expression becoming more and more sympathetic. Read, now you know how terrifying Watson is. What troubled people the most about Watson was not his extraordinary talent but his talent for causing trouble. No matter where Watson went, he would encounter trouble. Even if there were no trouble, Watson would still make some shocking moves to attract the attention of others. Antonio had not told him about the conflict between Watson and the king of the Holy Dragon Kingdom. Otherwise, Reed would be even more surprised. What should we do? Watson beat up a young master from the Archduke's family. No matter the reason, that is not a small matter. I think we shouldn't sit here and drink. We should resolve it. Reed was a little restless. He wanted to get up, but Antonio stopped him. Reed, don't be so impatient. This is not worth our time. There might be more serious problems later. More serious problems? What could be more serious than beating up the Grand Duke's child? Reed did not believe it. We have Watson. Oh, no, he is too strong. We need help. I repeat, come and help us immediately. Quote, at that moment, shouts came from outside. Then, the Campbell family members who had stayed in Reed and Antonio's tavern rushed out. Antonio, how did you know that things would become more serious? Reed looked outside in surprise and looked at Antonio, his eyes filled with suspicion and inquiry. Antonio took the red wine from his hand calmly, opened the wine bottle, and poured himself a glass. Just watch. This is just the beginning. Quote, at the capital's main street. At that moment, all the streets had been emptied, surrounded by a group of soldiers in golden armor and holding long spears. There were more than 1,000 soldiers, led by General Hone. Watson, you beat up young Master Augustus outside the Holy Dragon Tavern and hung him on a plaque, causing a bad commotion. Now, the Campbell family has requested His Majesty to dispatch the royal army, and we are arresting you now. You will be severely punished to ensure that justice is served. Hone looked at the young man and girl who had just walked out of the restaurant as they wiped their mouths with a handkerchief with a calm expression. He rubbed his forehead, his head hurt. He was familiar with the girl. She was the Sword Saint's daughter. He had seen her a few times before she had left the capital a few years ago. He was also familiar with the 12 or 13-year-old youth beside her. The youth had just followed Antonio to the capital. However, he had not expected that boy to cause such a huge sensation as soon as he arrived. First, he had fought the unicorn in front of the civil and military officials, and then he had passed the Royal Academy's assessment, leaving behind a rare perfect score. After that, he fought Augustus. Hone did not know what Watson was going to do next. At that moment, Watson slowly put the handkerchief back into his chest pocket and complained to Christina about the food he had just eaten in the restaurant. Lady Swordmistress, that flaming crystal lobster is really good. Thank you for your invitation. Next time, I'll treat you to something different. Watson, you're too kind. Compared to Watson, Christina was not so calm. The corner of her mouth twitched, and she subconsciously glanced at the thousands of Imperial guards guarding the nearby streets. Like the soldiers guarding the capital, those Imperial guards were all gold-tier elites. With thousands of gold-tier warriors, even an elite like Christina could not help but feel afraid. Watson, please cooperate with us. We won't do you any harm. Stubborn resistance will only make you more miserable. Even though you are Master Antonio and the Sword Saint's disciple, if you make a mistake in the capital, you will have the same ending regardless of whether you are a noble or an ordinary citizen. Sorry for offending you. Quote, when he realized that Watson intended to ignore him, Hone felt a wave of faint anger in his heart. He waved his hand at the thousands of soldiers beside him. Those soldiers immediately raised their long spears and pointed them at Watson. The tip of the spears flickered with the radiance of combat aura. It was obvious that they could release their combat skills at any moment. General Hone, you just said that regardless of whether one is a noble or an ordinary citizen, one will have the same fate if one makes a mistake in the capital. Is that true? Watson glanced at the glow of the weapons in the soldiers' hands, his expression still calm. You can ask around then. Why did I beat Augustus? He rushed into my private room and forced me to leave. He even attacked me first. I was just defending myself. If you want to arrest someone, you should arrest him. What's wrong with me? When someone bullied him, should he not fight or scold them back? Hone's expression froze. Watson, those are only your words. Furthermore, you said that young Master Augustus hit you. Why is he the one who is injured instead of you? I'm not here to do anything to you. I simply wanted to clarify the truth and appease the Campbell family's leader. Don't worry, as the commander of the royal guards, I will definitely not wrongly accuse an innocent man. I just hope that you can cooperate with me. Hone was only talking and threatening or not attacking Watson. On the one hand, he was worried about Watson's identity. If he sided with the Campbell family, Antonio and the Sword Saint would be dissatisfied with him. On the other hand, he was afraid of conflict. He was a platinum-tier warrior and had thousands of gold warriors. He could accidentally hurt Watson. Logically speaking, as the commander of the royal guards, he should not be involved in the fight between Watson and Augustus. However, after the Campbell family reported that Augustus had been beaten up, His Majesty ordered him to intervene in that matter. He wanted to send Watson to the Campbell family before Master Antonio and the Sword Saint could react. I don't know why His Majesty is so concerned about this matter and even wants to send Watson to the Campbell family. They will definitely mistreat him. This will inevitably cause the anger of Master Antonio and the Sword Saint. Or was that the king's intention? Hone tried to guess that. However, as a general with a high IQ, he could still not guess the king's thoughts. He could only follow his judgment. Well, since you have said so, General Hone, all right, then I'll do it. Watson seemed to have thought of something. He rolled his eyes and smiled at Hone. He took the initiative to extend his hands. A guard beside him immediately took out a heavy black shackle and put it on his limbs. Watson, please try to understand. This shackle is made from an anti-magic material. It's a tool made of a peak gold tier special ores. Even a platinum tier elite would not be able to display their full strength after wearing it. I'm doing this to prevent you from escaping. After the matter is settled, I'll remove that shackle if you're innocent. Don't worry, General Hone. I understand. Watson raised his black shackled arms slightly and moved his legs. This anti-magic material is quite effective. Even though I'm at diamond tier, the power in my body is still suppressed by more than half. He could feel the magic and combat aura in his body were suppressed. It was also difficult to use his abilities from the priest and archer classes. It seemed that anti-magic material could prohibit the movement of all energy factors. After moving around for a while and getting used to the shackles, Watson waved his hand at Christina, who looked worried. Lady Swordmistress, I'm going to the Campbell family. You don't need to come with me. Go home and take some rest. By the way, I hope you won't tell my two masters about what happened today. Watson, are you serious? You don't need me to go with you? Christina looked a bit confused. She was the Sword Saint's daughter. Perhaps they would let him go, considering her identity. She did not know what those people would do, and Watson was smart enough to know that. Don't worry, Lady Swordmistress. I'll be fine. Watson's determined gaze let Christina know that he had confidence. However, Watson was bound by the anti-magic material. Even Christina could not break free from it. Even though he was a diamond tier expert, it would be difficult for him to even reach platinum tier strength with those shackles in place. Where did his confidence come from? While Christina was thinking about that, Watson had already followed Hone's army to the Campbell family's manor in the royal city. Christina hesitated. She stomped her feet and turned around, headed to a tavern in the royal city. Although Watson looks very confident, I still can't let him be sent to the Campbell family. I must tell Father and Master Antonio. Watson has just joined Father's sect. If the Campbell family decides to punish them, then people might think that our family is weak and can't protect our own men. Furthermore, if I can save Watson this time, I'd be doing him a favor. He might even open his heart to me. Christina smiled and left the area. She did not notice that two other noblemen walked out of the corner of the street not long after she left. One was a man, and the other was a woman. The woman had a parasol in her hand. She looked like she was only 12 or 13 years old. Her hair, including her eyelashes, was pure white. The young man had bandages wrapped around his hands, and he looked bitter. They were Lana and Casey. Watson has finally left. Fortunately, the one who angered him this time was the Campbell family. He did not care about the relationship between Augustus and me. I have to say, the Campbell family's move to capture Watson was not a wise one. They'd be in heaps of trouble. Brother Casey, can I ask you why you refused to go to the Campbell family to testify that Watson had struck young Master Augustus? Lana twirled the umbrella handle and asked curiously. Of course, I don't want to offend Watson. So, you're saying that Watson is more terrifying than the Campbell family? Although I don't want to admit it, that's the truth. And I'm not afraid, I just don't want to cause trouble. Those two lines seem to mean the same thing. What about you? Didn't you also reject Augustus' invitation? If it weren't for what you said at the Holy Dragon Tavern, I wouldn't have to explain so much. And Augustus wouldn't have hated Watson so badly. Why did you do that? Brother Casey, that was unintentional. I'm still a child. You won't hold it against me, right? Hurry up and go. Get a good seat outside the Campbell family. If you're late, you won't be able to enjoy the most lively show in the capital. As the voices gradually faded away, Casey and Lana, the siblings, also disappeared from the street corner. Is that the Campbell family? About 20 minutes later, Watson stood in front of a gorgeous manor and looked inside. His face did not have the self-awareness of a criminal. Instead, it was filled with curiosity. The Campbell family manor was very interesting. The first thing he saw when he looked inside was not the beautifully manicured lawn but a large clock that was more than 10 meters tall. It had two black hands to record the passage of time on the clock. The black hands formed a sharp contrast with the silver scale. Every time the hands drew a number, the number would disappear and be replaced by a new character. The characters written on the characters were not 1 to 12, like traditional clocks, but in the thousands instead. It was as if the clock had been continuously accumulating time since it was created. It looked very magical. When he realized that Watson was interested in the clock, Hone explained, "That is the clock of life. It is said that the clock can measure the life of anyone and anything and extend the life of that person or thing in a special way." As the largest and most famous magical toolmaker in the kingdom, the Campbell family's clock of life is also considered famous among the kingdom's limited platinum tier tools. All right. Since we've arrived at the Campbell family, my mission is completed. You can go in by yourself. You are not coming with me, General Hone? I thought you wanted to prove my innocence? How will you judge whether I'm right or wrong? Quote, Watson revealed a half-smile at the thought of Hone trying to escape his responsibility after bringing him there. That brat. Cursing inwardly, Hone revealed a kind expression on his face. Watson, you're right. I should take you in. Although I'm busy as the Royal Guard's commander, you're still Master Antonio and the Sword Saint's disciple, after all. I'll keep an eye on you until the last moment. Let's go. As soon as they arrived at the entrance, the gate opened automatically. Two maids walked out and bowed to Hone. General Hone, Master wants you to bring him to the living room. He has been waiting there for a long time. Quote, following the two maids, Watson and Hone entered the depths of the Campbell family's mansion. The deeper they went, the more surprised Watson felt. Besides the massive clock of life outside, the building's walls also had clocks and watches of all sizes on them. Gears collided with each other, producing some mechanical sounds. Even the landscape in the garden had steel plates with soil and vegetation on the surface. Over time, those pieces of land would move on their own, forming different patterns. It is as expected of a family that is famous for making magical tools. Some of those gears and movable steel plates are already similar to some of the things I used in my previous life. The concept is quite advanced. Watson stood at the spot and looked around a few more times. Other than the highly mechanized buildings, there was another characteristic, which was the heat. Even after he took off his outer clothes, Watson's forehead was still dripping with sweat. The temperature in the courtyard was more than 10 degrees higher than the temperature outside. Master is waiting in the hall. We are not qualified to enter there. You are distinguished guests, so you may enter by yourselves. We will take our leave first. The two maids lowered their heads as they spoke humbly before they quickly left. Watson and Horn exchanged a look. Watson pushed the door open and walked into a hall. Augustus was sitting among those magic tools. His limbs were weak, and he was drooping around the chair. When he saw Watson, he raised his eyebrows and revealed a cruel expression. Watson, you're finally here. I've been waiting for you for a long time. Everything here is under the control of the Campbell family. I only need to say one sentence to decide whether you live or die. Please don't kneel and cry because you're afraid. Chapter 385. Fusing a peak diamond tier puppet. Augustus, don't be impudent in front of the guests. Is that what I taught you? Just as Augustus' voice fell, an old voice came from the room. Watson looked up and saw an old man with white hair and a beard standing behind a sculpture, carefully fiddling with something. It seemed like he was repairing the magical item. Augustus was known to be proud and domineering. However, after the old man spoke, he lowered his head and shut his mouth obediently. He looked like a good boy. When Watson looked up, the old man put down the things in his hand, revealing a sharp-edged face imposing. He did not look angry. He swept his gaze over Watson and Hone before fixing it on Hone. The old man said, "General Hone, long time no see. Thank you for sending the offender who injured my grandson. The Campbell family will judge that young man next. You can leave now. Oh, right, please remember to thank His Majesty for me when you go back. Armand, no matter what, that young man is Master Antonio and the Sword Saint's disciple. If you go too far, it won't be easy to explain things to them. Furthermore, I promised Watson that I would investigate that matter thoroughly, so it's better for me to stay here for the time being." After hesitating for a moment, Hone looked at Watson and forced a smile. "Since General Hone is worried, then you may stay here and watch. I did not intend to go too far with that young man. He broke Augustus' limbs, and I want to break his limbs too, that's all." Armand Campbell, the Campbell family's patriarch, stared at Watson with a cold gaze. "Master Armand, as the head of the 3 archdukes' families, I thought you were a reasonable person. Now it seems that you are no different from those noblemen who only favor their own children. It's not easy to break my 4 limbs. You are the first one who dares to speak like that to someone from the Campbell family." Armand clapped his hands. The walls suddenly made cracking sounds before they fell off, revealing 4 deep passages. Puppets with magic crystals embedded in their chests walked out of the passages. Those puppets were similar to those used in the Royal Academy's assessment. They were divided into 4 classes: warrior, mage, archer, and priest. From the outside, those puppets looked real. Except for the fact that there were no metal connections between their facial features and joints, the other parts of the puppets retained the same characteristics as humans. They exuded an aura equivalent to that of a human gold-tier elite. There were quite a number of puppets walking out from the 4 passages. They walked at a neat pace, causing the ground to rumble. In just a few minutes, those puppets had surrounded Armand and Augustus. There were almost 500 of them. "You look surprised. The Campbell family is the largest family that deals in forming magical tools in the capital. In recent years, the strongest magical tool in the kingdom has been those magic puppets. As long as they are inlaid with crystals of the same level, they will be able to display strength that is no less than a gold-tier professional. Furthermore, the damaged parts can also be dismantled and replaced. In the future, those magical puppets will inevitably replace the kingdom's army. Even the test puppets in the Royal Academy were built by our family's engineering department." Armand stood in the center of the group of puppets and spoke to Watson. "I'm not showing off. I heard that Master Antonio and the Sword Saint's disciple is a platinum-tier elite. If you are at your peak, then those puppets might not be able to hurt you. However, you're currently wearing a shackle made of anti-magic materials. You can't use your strength. How long can you last in front of those puppets? Don't worry, I've already prepared a healer. After your limbs are broken, I'll order the healer to treat you. You don't have to worry about the after effects. I don't need a healer. I don't think I'll need one." Watson looked around him. The corners of his mouth curled upward. "Watson, don't talk big. Even if I weren't injured, I could not fight those puppets. Even though you're a little stronger than me, in your current state, I'm afraid you can't even defeat one puppet, let alone 500 of them." Augustus was sitting on a chair as he laughed out loud. It was as if he could see Watson's limbs break, and it made him very happy. Just as he was laughing out loud, Watson glanced at the puppets around him. The basic information about the puppets immediately appeared in his eyes. Gold-tier puppets. Abilities. They are divided into 4 classes. Different classes have different skills. The skills are the magic equations that are input into the magic crystal in advance. Magical energy supply. The magic crystal provides the energy, and it can be replaced. Once the magic crystal is damaged, the puppet will collapse. There is no other weakness. Simple commands. Can complete simple tasks according to the master's orders. Additional abilities. Spiritual link. Different puppets have a different set of thought systems. They can share information. While they were calculating the situation, 500 gold-tier puppets had already taken action. 100 puppets took action first. Their bodies were covered with all kinds of combat aura as they rushed toward Watson. The first few puppets grabbed his limbs and lifted him. They continued to pull him in all directions as though they wanted to rip him apart. The remaining few hundred puppets stood on the spot and watched that scene quietly. After the puppets dragged him toward the sky, Watson heard Augustus' loud laughter. At the same time, he was mocking and ridiculing him about how he was dead, and that was what Watson got for going against him. Watson turned a deaf ear to all of that. He stretched his right hand outward in midair, clenched it gently, and spat out a few words. System fusion, activate. Congratulations on successfully fusing 500 gold tier puppets, Master. You now have the diamond tier 8-arm war god puppet. As the fusion system activated, whether it was the puppets attacking Watson or those that were quietly waiting at the side, their bodies turned into a ray of light and disappeared from where they were. They fused into a puppet as tall as a person to a giant puppet about 10 meters tall. That giant puppet had the appearance of a female. Its black hair cascaded downward like a waterfall, and it wore a mage's robe with nested armor. Besides the 2 arms holding a longsword and a shield, 6 other arms were on its back. Each of them had a mage's scepter, a longbow, and a prayer book. Diamond tier puppet, 8-arm war god. Abilities. Proficient in all classes, equal to the strength of 4 diamond tier elites. Absolute techniques. Proficient in all types of combat techniques, can use the least amount of strength to defeat the enemy. 8-armed dance. Releases weapons in those 8 arms and skills from 4 different classes, causing large-scale damage simultaneously. War god's body. Any damage received will be recovered in a short time. Self-evolution. Has a self-awareness comparable to that of humans, can learn to evolve on its own. Additional abilities. Disperse core. The core in the body can classify and reassemble. Even if the core is shattered, it will not be paralyzed. After reading the information about the 8-arm war god, Watson nodded in satisfaction. Then, he flipped in the air and sat on the shoulder of the giant puppet. What is that? It did not take Watson a long time to fuse those puppets. In fact, it only took him a few seconds. At that moment, Hone finally reacted. He looked at the 10-meter-tall giant puppet in front of him, which almost touched the dome of the mansion. He was stunned. Watson, what did you do? Did you fuse those puppets? Am I seeing things? Augustus's eyes widened. He had hoped that those puppets hack Watson into pieces so that he could vent the anger in his heart. However, he did not expect Watson to fuse those puppets. Most importantly, the fused puppets had an aura that surpassed the platinum tier. They even seemed to listen to Watson's commands. What kind of magic was that? Or was he hallucinating? Armand watched the scene without saying a word. Even though he did not say anything, the shock in his eyes betrayed his mood. What kind of technique could fuse a group of puppets and raise their tier? It is no wonder His Majesty instructed me to be ruthless toward that youth. I can even kill him. It seems that youth's ability is too terrifying and has already aroused His Majesty's suspicion, Armand muttered in his heart. He could not help but recall when King Landhar III commanded his presence at the palace an hour ago. The king had given him a special order. He was to kill Watson. If he could not do it, then he would have to find more information about the young man's strength. Armand had ordered his men to get Hone to lead the royal army to capture Watson and bring him to the Campbell family. On the one hand, he was angry that his grandson had been beaten. On the other hand, it was His Majesty's plan. Without His Majesty's permission, even as an archduke, he would not have been able to mobilize the royal army. Armand was very familiar with the king. He was a terrifying man who was good at toying with people's hearts. 10 years ago, during the Demoness cult's rebellion, he had already seen through the king's nature. It was precisely because he knew King Landhar III that the Campbell family had been assisting him wholeheartedly from all those years ago. That was also why he had been conferred the title as an archduke after the Demoness cult was eliminated. He felt that he understood the situation very well. However, Armand could not understand why King Landhar III wanted to use him to kill Watson. Such a genius would be a good thing for the Holy Dragon Kingdom's future. It was impossible for the king not to know that. However, the ruler still wanted to kill Watson. That was somewhat intriguing. Armand still thought the same when he saw Watson fused those puppets. However, at that moment, his thoughts changed. Even if the Campbell family had created those 500 puppets, they had also spent a significant amount of money, which had vanished. Armand did not feel any heartache about that. Instead, his heart was filled with fear. He was very familiar with puppets, so he knew that the gigantic puppet had surpassed the platinum tier. It was as if it had reached the diamond tier. With just a flick of its finger, Watson had fused 500 gold tier puppets into a diamond tier puppet. If Watson wanted to mass produce more diamond tier puppets, he could do it, and that thought would terrify anyone. The Holy Dragon Kingdom only had one diamond tier expert, Sword Saint Reed. If Watson could use that ability to duplicate a large number of diamond tier puppets, he could have the strength to contend with the entire Holy Dragon Kingdom. It was no wonder King Landhar III feared Watson and commanded him to kill Watson. If he were the king, with such a monster-like youth by his side, he would probably not be able to eat or sleep. Armand's mind had many thoughts. Watson sat on the shoulder of the 8-arm war god puppet, leisurely swaying his legs, and said, "Master Armand, I'm sorry, but those golems are already mine. If you have any more powerful methods, please use them as soon as possible. Men, capture that youth for me." Armand clapped his hands with a solemn expression. Following his voice, the guards rushed out from the tunnels in all directions. Those guards held long spears in their hands. The aura they emitted was stronger than the puppets just now. There were no less than 100 guards there. When they saw the huge puppet under Watson's command, they stopped and sucked in a breath of cold air. What kind of puppet is that? Why is it so huge? And is not that young man Antonio and the Grand Swordmaster's disciple? Why does he even know how to make a puppet? You should know that even the experts in our family cannot easily make a puppet of that size and make it move. Now is not the time to think about that. Quickly, the magical crystal is embedded in its chest. If you break its chest, it will be paralyzed. The guards were amazed by the puppet's power, but they still braced themselves. One guard wrapped the spear in his hand with a thick layer of fire elemental combat aura. He turned the spear into a fire dragon and let it fly toward the magical crystal embedded in the puppet's chest. Boom! The flaming dragon-like spear collided with the magic crystal, making a crisp sound. The crystal was almost undamaged. On the contrary, a crack appeared on the spear before it shattered completely. It was as if a toothpick had hit a rock. DMN. What material is the shell of that puppet made of? How can it be so hard? Look, the 6 arms on the back of that puppet are moving. It seems like they are going to attack us. Everyone, be on your guard. The guards saw the puppet's 8 arms moved. The 2 arms held a weapon, causing the weapon to emit light and spin rapidly. The arms that held the sword and shield that symbolized the warrior class combined the 2 items to turn them into a sharp blade and shield. The arms that held the magic scepter also raised the weapon high before forming a magical light that did not disperse. The arms that held the longbow and prayer book were the same. The former drew the bow and knocked the arrow, and streams of light burst outward. The latter drew the light from the sky, casting a layer of divine light on the 8-arm war god's body. That move was the 8-arm war god's offensive skill, the 8-arm dance. The 8-arm war god began to spin rapidly in just an instant as if it had turned into a giant windmill. The weapon in its hand touched all the walls, leaving deep ravines on them. Large chunks of the walls had collapsed. Cracks also appeared in the originally sturdy dome. Over 100 gold-tier guards appeared with combat aura armor on their bodies. They spread their combat aura wings and flew in front of the 8-arm war god. They wanted to use their bodies to block the puppet from advancing, but before they could touch the 8-arm war god, their bodies were blown into the sky by the air currents that the puppet created. They shattered the dome and landed outside the mansion. What happened? Was that an earthquake? The maids and servants ran outside as they felt the tremors caused by the 8-arm war god. They looked around in panic. Noble ladies in gorgeous long dresses and gentlemen with top hats trailed behind those servants. It was obvious that they were members of the Campbell family. They had the same attitude. "Run! The house is going to collapse." A group of people shouted and rushed out of the mansion. At that time, they stood outside the door and saw a scene that they would never forget. They saw 8 long arms covered with combat aura light, and the light pierced through the dome. The light shot up into the sky and shattered the floating clouds. It did not dissipate for a long time. The huge Campbell mansion was like a piece of tofu in front of the 8 arms. In just a short while, it was torn apart and collapsed into ruins. Watson was sitting on the 8-arm war god's shoulder before he rose into the sky. He looked down at the entire courtyard. His expression was calm, as if he had just done a trivial thing. He even leaned against the 8-armed war god's neck and yawned. It seems like I've caused too much of a ruckus. However, since things have come to that point, the Campbell family would never let me off that easily. I have to think of a way to stop those guys from finding trouble with me. Watson's eyes twitched. His gaze landed on the clock of life in the courtyard, which was not far from the gate. That made his eyes light up. When he entered the mansion, Hone had explained to him in detail that the clock of life was the symbol of the Campbell family. At the same time, it was also the most powerful one of the kingdom's less than 10 platinum weapons. If that clock of life was used as a threat, those Campbell family members might stop. Having made up his mind, Watson hooked his finger at the clock of life in the distance and said, "System fusion." There was a buzz. The clock of life, which had been sitting in the courtyard for decades, had not moved at all. At that moment, the hands on the clock's surface vibrated crazily as it pointed at the 12 o'clock position. At the same time, the huge clock rose from the ground. It turned into a milky white light, covering the diamond-tier puppet. "Congratulations, Master, for fusing the clock of life and the 8-armed war god. You have obtained a diamond-tier peak puppet, the King of Time." Chapter 386, Holy Relics. Peak Diamond-tier puppet, the King of Time. Ability. Retains all of the 8-armed war god's abilities. Additional abilities. Time reversal can be activated when receiving damage, restoring one's body to its optimal state before taking any damage. That ability can be used on others. Time Blade uses a time gap to create a cut, dealing damage to a diamond-tier elite. Absolute speed. Up to the speed of light. Time gap. The body is hidden in the time gap, preventing the enemy from attacking it. After fusing the clock of life, the 8-armed war god immediately evolved. Its original 8 arms had become 10. The 2 additional arms had a smooth surface and were inlaid with silver-white clock plates. The scales were changing at will. The other arms had more or less formed a clock-shaped outer shell. On the face of the originally feminine puppet, the 2 pitch-black eyes had turned silver-white. The black needle inside was rotating bit by bit. As the needle moved, time around the puppet distorted, making its body disappear at will, and it was faintly discernible. Not bad, that puppet can control time. Compared to ordinary diamond-tier experts, that puppet is even better. Watson was delighted with the newly fused outcome. He controlled the King of Time puppet to wave its right hand toward the collapsed mansion. Along with the King of Time's actions, the clock-shaped outer shell began to rotate, emitting brilliant colors as it enveloped the mansion before him. It caused the collapsed mansion to stop and gradually turn to an undamaged state as if time had reversed. The mansion had already collapsed by more than half, but under everyone's watchful eyes, it returned to its original state in just a few seconds. There was not even a single crack on the wall. What on earth is going on? That inexplicable huge puppet and its terrifying power. Who is that youth? Among the people who had run out of the mansion, a fat man with a handlebar mustache stared at the sky with an ugly expression. His mustache trembled. His name was McGee Campbell, Armand's and the Campbell family's eldest son. A tall and thin middle-aged man stood near him. The man did not look at the sky. Instead, his eyes stared gloomily at the mansion that was in perfect condition with a worried expression. "McGee, don't you care about our family's matters at all? Just over an hour ago, a youth called Watson had beat up my son, Augustus. He's the young man sitting on the shoulder of the huge puppet in the sky. Who can catch him? DMN it. Father originally planned to punish that young man here, but how did things turn out like that? Augustus is still in the mansion. Is he all right?" The tall and thin man ridiculed McGee in an unfriendly tone. It was Newman, the Campbell family's second son. "Newman, why should I care about the family's matters? Haven't you always been in charge of the family's various businesses? Furthermore, you have a good son. Father has already decided to hand the Campbell family to him in the future. Now that such a major incident has happened, you can only blame yourself for being negligent in managing Augustus. I've heard of Watson. He's Master Antonio and the Sword Saint's disciple." McGee had no intention of helping Newman. Instead, he mocked and ridiculed him. Even though he was the family's eldest son, McGee had always been inferior to his younger brother in terms of ability. It was not only that, but he also could not have children. That caused him to be excluded from the list of candidates to be the family's successor. McGee frequently went to places of pleasure for that purpose. He even bought a large number of medicinal herbs from the black market in an attempt to cure his illness. Unfortunately, it was all to no avail. As time passed, he accepted his fate. However, he still felt indignant at Newman for taking everything that should belong to him. Eldest brother, second brother, stop arguing for a while. Father is still in the mansion. Who wants to go in and save him? The voice of a third person rang out. It was a woman in formal attire. She looked tidy and well kept. If it were not for her half-black and half-white hair and crow's feet at the corners of her eyes, that woman would have looked like she was in her 20s. Freya, don't talk nonsense. The puppet is so powerful. Who dares to enter the mansion now? Do you dare to go? If you don't dare to go, then don't tell us to go. I don't want to die. McGee rolled his eyes. His words made the woman named Freya choke. She quickly looked at Newman. In the end, Newman also turned his head, obviously not intending to rush in to save anyone. Well, if you don't want to go, then I'll go myself. Freya snorted and was about to walk into the mansion. At that very moment, someone kicked the mansion door open. Hone walked out of the mansion with a dirty face, supporting Armand, who was also dirty. Behind them was Augustus, who looked half dead and covered in blood. Hone also dragged the younger man with him. Watson, are you crazy? You almost killed us all. Hone raised his head and complained loudly to Watson. Watson had fused with a diamond tier puppet, and he had used that puppet to launch an attack, causing the mansion to collapse. Thankfully, he was a platinum tier warrior who specialized in earth elemental combat aura. When the house collapsed, he controlled the earth elements to form a protective barrier around his body, protecting Armand and Augustus. Otherwise, that attack would have definitely taken their lives. Watson shook his head. I'm sorry, General Hone. I used too much strength just now, but I don't feel like I've done anything wrong. After all, you promised to clear my name. In reality, Master Campbell only wanted me here to bully me. Since you can't help me, I can only help myself. Hone's expression froze. Just as he was about to say something, Augustus stared fiercely at the sky. Watson, you dared to destroy our family mansion. Even if there is no grudge between us, the Campbell family can't let you off so easily now. You have caused so much damage here, just wait for your payback. Our mansion contains a large number of precious magical tools, and they are worth no less than 10 million gold coins. What would you do if I won't compensate you? Watson sat on the giant puppet's shoulder and replied with a calm expression. If you don't compensate us, you won't be able to leave alive today. Take a look at this before you threaten me. Watson patted the puppet beneath him, the King of Time. The clock-shaped shell on the King of Time's body immediately came to life. It squirmed and gathered toward its chest, gradually turning into a clock that was only 10 meters tall. The inside of the clock was exquisitely made, and its appearance was almost identical to the clock of life that had stood in the courtyard. Is that the clock of life? Watson, you placed our family's most precious treasure on a puppet? Augustus looked at the clock on the King of Time's chest, then looked in the direction of the courtyard in the distance, the area now empty. His eyes immediately reddened. The clock of life was essential to the Campbell family. That clock could grant them a longer lifespan, but it was also absolutely accurate time-wise. That clock was responsible for correcting time. The Campbell family's magical tools were far superior to others. Since they had lost that clock, their magic tools' quality might drop too. Yes, I've fused the clock of life into the puppet's body. If you promise to forget what had just happened and swear not to provoke me in the future, I'll return that clock to you. Otherwise, Watson, stop dreaming. We'll get it back when we cripple you. Before Watson could finish speaking, Augustus had already snorted coldly. When the Campbell family members saw that Armand and the others had been rescued, they also began to discuss animatedly. Watson attacked us, and he dared to steal the clock of life. Is there something wrong with his brain? Freya looked puzzled. Newman's brows were tightly knitted as he said, regardless of what he thinks, regardless of whether he is Master Antonio and the Sword Saint's disciple, he dared to act atrociously in the Campbell family. He won't leave here unscathed. After we catch him, we will inform Antonio and Reed to come and take him. We will let them take a good look at what kind of disciple they have groomed. McGee chuckled at Newman's angry look. He had no intention of joining their plan. While the Campbell family was exchanging words, groups of soldiers with gold-tier armor and weapons appeared from every corner of the courtyard. Thousands of gold-tier warriors surrounded Watson and his puppet. If the Ptolemy family were famous for building invincible gold-tier ships, then the Campbell family was well known for producing the most advanced weapons and armor in the kingdom. Even the royal army could not do without their items. At that moment, the thousands of gold-tier warriors in the courtyard raised their weapons of the same level and attacked Watson. Thousands of combat auras streaked across the air and gathered into an explosion in the sky. Watson controlled the King of Time puppet to raise its arm, which symbolized the warrior class, and used the shield to block the attack. The King of Time was unharmed. It punched the ground several times, and the open fist on its back landed on the ground. The earth trembled, and the ground spread out like water waves. However, the Campbell family guards in gold-tier armor managed to block it. Even though those guards were shocked when they saw the power contained within the King of Time's fist, their armor did not crack. One could see that the quality of their equipment was pretty good. "Everyone, there's no need to attack. We just need to tie that guy down so that he won't be able to escape. Let's get him." Newman's eyes lit up when the guards blocked the puppet's attack. He gave Freya and McGee a look and quickly walked toward the mansion. Freya followed closely behind him, but McGee had an unwilling look on his face. After hesitating for a while, he also trailed after them. After a while, Newman and the other two walked out of the mansion. Each of them held a triangular object in their hands. The triangular object was not made of stone or metal but a rarer substance. Each of the triangular objects had a huge eye carved on it. Third generation Holy Relic. Void Whistle, incomplete. Holy relics were artifacts left behind by ancient civilizations. Their quality may surpass modern technology. According to the historical records, holy relics were divided into the 1st to the 12th generations, and among them, the 1st generation was older and more powerful. Ability. Void Whistle is suspected to be a weapon left behind by the 3rd generation of the Void civilization 8,000 years ago. It can banish objects or creatures into the endless void and build high-energy particle cannons to crush enemies into ashes. Watson's gaze was subconsciously attracted to the 3 triangular objects, and he used the system to retrieve their information automatically. He sighed. Are they not only a family that makes the kingdom's magical tools? They have diamond-tier tools. There were no more than 10 platinum-tier tools in the kingdom. That was the truth because the kingdom could only produce platinum-tier magical tools. However, that did not mean that the kingdom only had platinum-tier tools. They had some from ruins of previous civilizations, and some surpassed the platinum tier. For example, the diamond-tier world transformation mirror from the City of Steel's underground maze. It was a sacred relic. Those sacred relics contributed to the kingdom's civilization and power. One could say that the kingdom's true power was much stronger than it appeared on the surface. Newman and the other two took the Void Whistle and began to fuse it. Their family had studied the relic for a long time and knew its true usage. However, before they began to fuse it, Armand waved his hand. "Wait, don't use the holy relic first." Armand, supported by Hone, limped toward Watson and looked at the massive puppet above his head. He said, "Watson, you hit Augustus and destroyed many of our magic tools. According to the law between noblemen, violent acts that cause injuries and those who recklessly violate the nobleman's etiquette will be sentenced to death. Even though you are the astrologer and the sword saint's disciple, you still have to follow the law because they were set by His Majesty, well, unless you are prepared to go against the entire country." Armand's words were full of force, but Watson was unmoved. He waited for the other party's next words. He thought Armand would start threatening him again, asking him to surrender. Unexpectedly, Armand did not say that. Instead, he smiled at him. "You wreaked havoc here by yourself, and I haven't seen such a thing in decades. I have to say that I quite admire your courage. I'll give you a chance. If you agree to one of my requests, I will let all these go." "Father, did your head suffer any injuries from the tremor just now?" Watson had yet to respond to Armand's question. All 3 of Armand's children looked shocked. Newman even tightened his grip on the sacred relic in his hand. Watson had hit his son, but the young man had refused their family's punishment and even caused a huge commotion. He also almost destroyed their mansion. They could have died. Under such circumstances, Armand would be a fool to let Watson go. Shut up, Newman. Is it your turn to speak when I am speaking? Armand glanced in Newman's direction. Newman immediately revealed a scared expression and did not dare to speak. After that, Armand looked at Watson, his smile filled with amiability. Watson, one more friend might lead to another path. You don't intend to continue this stalemate with us, right? This is not beneficial to anyone. Master Armand, you sound reasonable. May I know your requests, please? First, hand over the mysterious technique that can fuse puppets. We will not make a move against you, and we will treat you as our most honorable guest. What do you think? Armand's eyes flickered. Watson laughed. It looked like the older man coveted his system. That man was a shrewd character. He could see the value of a commodity. However, Wazin could not impart that knowledge to others. I'm sorry, Master Armand. Only I can master the ability to fuse the puppets. That is a special magic, so I can't impart it to you. It's all right. I know it's not easy to impart such a technique. Since that's the case, you can opt to give us the puppet you fused. That puppet can erase the grudge between us. That's fine. However, that puppet is already at the peak of the diamond tier. I feel like it's a loss to just give it to you. Watson's eyes narrowed as he stroked his chin. What a coward. The things you used to create that puppet belong to our family. You even fused our family's treasure, the clock of life, with the puppet. Isn't it right to ask you to hand over the puppet? We're kind enough not to pursue other things with you. How dare you bargain with us? Newman was the first to speak. His brows were filled with dissatisfaction. The price of a magical tool doesn't lie in the materials, but the quality of the final product. It can turn low-tier materials into higher quality items. That is the value of a blacksmith. As a magical tool forger, you should understand that principle, right? If you think there's a problem with my price, then we can cancel the deal. Anyway, I'm not afraid of fighting the Campbell family to the end. As for that puppet, you'll never get it. Kid, you. Newman was about to say something else, but Armand waved his hand to silence him. Kid, let's not beat around the bush. Just say it. If you want to keep that puppet, what price do we need to pay for you to part with it? I don't want much. I'll give you the puppet. I want to exchange it for 10 high-quality holy relics from your family's inventory. Chapter 387, The Real Threat. 10 holy relics, is not that a lot? After hearing Watson's request, everyone widened their eyes. They felt incredulous. If 10 holy relics were not too many, what number would be too many then? Holy relics were the products left behind by previous civilizations. Even though they had very powerful effects, no one understood their specific functions. Therefore, holy relics were very precious, and once they were damaged, it was basically impossible to repair them. The Campbell family had the most extensive collection of holy relics in the kingdom. There were only about 20 of them, and Watson had asked for 10. He was really asking for too much. Father, I don't think that kid has any sincerity in making a deal with us. He's clearly playing with us. In addition to the damage he just caused, I suggest we capture him and punish him properly. Newman could not bear Watson's price. Punish him? How are you going to punish him? Can't you see that that is a diamond-tier puppet, and it's not an ordinary diamond-tier puppet? Do you have a way to defeat a diamond-tier puppet? Armand's eyes hardened as he criticized his son. Newman suppressed his fury and said, Father, I don't have a way to defeat a diamond-tier puppet. However, no matter how strong that puppet is, it's still just a puppet. As long as we defeat the person who controls it, then that puppet will be nothing more than a pile of scrap metal. If we defeat Watson, we will be able to reclaim that puppet for free. As for defeating Watson, it's simple. We have thousands of gold-tier warriors here, as well as many holy relics. In addition, General Hone, that platinum-tier elite, is also here. Newman's words made Armand fall into deep thought. His eyes were slightly moist. Newman was right. He had to lower his voice and negotiate a price with Watson. If he captured Watson, he could torture him and force him to reveal his secret. He could get the puppet and obtain Watson's fusion secret. You heard it too, Watson. The price you just offered is too low, causing my sons to be unable to listen to it anymore. If you can reduce it slightly, perhaps I can order them not to attack you. That's my price. If you disagree with it, then you won't get the same price later. Watson revealed a faint smile. He was not afraid of Armand's threat. Brat, you still dare to say such words? It seems like you can't spell the word death. Third generation holy relic, void whistle, fuse. Newman snorted. When Armand did not stop him, he threw the holy relic into the air. Freya and McGee also threw the holy relics in their hands. The relics formed a triangle floating in the air. The eyes on the relics shot beams of dazzling magical elements. They fused in the air and formed an undulating gate. There was endless darkness behind the gate, which flickered with starlight. It was a starry sky of the universe. The moment the gate appeared, the light immediately rose and turned into a fence made of light that surrounded it. It transformed into a cage and locked the puppet in it. The gigantic puppet struggled and tried to break the cage with its 10 arms. However, its attacks were ineffective. No one knew what the enclosure was made of, but it was as hard as diamonds. It kept pulling the King of Time puppet toward the door in the air. The puppet was drawn behind the door and came to the endless void in just a few seconds. Its body was covered in a layer of hard ice, and it stopped moving. "You don't have anything anymore, kid. What can you count on now?" Newman laughed at Watson, his face full of pride. "Of course, I'm counting on other tools. It's not like I can only make puppets." The playful look on Watson's face became more serious. He extended his right hand toward the thousands of gold-tier guards around him. "System fusion, activate. Congratulations on successfully fusing 1,000 sets of gold-tier armor, Master. You have obtained a Starlight-tier armor, the Goddess of Armor's celestial feather robe. Congratulations on successfully fusing 1,000 gold-tier weapon sets, Master. You have obtained the Starlight-tier weapon, the God of War's Sword of Strife. A feather coat that was made from rules and covered with divine radiance descended from the sky. At the same time, a red and black longsword also dropped from heaven. The red and black veins on the blade looked like human blood vessels. They attracted the magical elements between heaven and earth with each breath. One look at that sword would stimulate one's desire to kill. Starlight tier item. The Goddess of Armor's celestial feather robe. Abilities. Absolute protection. It is entirely immune to attacks from anyone with a lower tier than the Starlight tier. Absolute defense. The feather coat contains the absolute defense rule. And absolute concealment. It includes the concealment rule to hide one's aura and fall into absolute invisibility. Additional abilities. The glittering kingdom of the Sea of Clouds. The feather coat is fused with the clouds in the sky to form the kingdom of the clouds, causing Starlight tier damage. The God of War's Sword of Strife. Abilities. Absolute strife. The blade can release killing intent that makes people fight endlessly. It can also make people in a kingdom go crazy. Absolute slaughter. The power of its victim will become a part of the sword. There is no upper limit to the increase in power, and it can be stacked indefinitely. Absolute death. Its victim's body will explode upon death, killing everyone within a 10-meter radius. Additional ability. Kingdom of Endless Battle. Calls on the Divine Kingdom to fight indefinitely, trapping the enemy. The enemy will continue to fight, dying and resurrecting until everyone dies. The attributes of 2 Starlight tier weapons appeared in Watson's eyes. He opened his arms, and the feather coat of heaven immediately landed lightly on his body. That description was somewhat inappropriate because the celestial feather robe was made from rules, and rules were invisible. The white feathers appeared on Watson's body, one by one, and then were pieced together. As for the Sword of Strife, it automatically appeared in Watson's hand after he put on the armor. Black and red lights swirled around his palm. Watson felt a sense of pride when he held the sword in his hand. He knew he could kill tens of thousands of people with just a swing of the sword. It is as I expected of a Starlight tier weapon and armor. It is almost completely formed from the laws. At the same time, it can also build a divine kingdom. The celestial feather robe and the Sword of Strife could build the Kingdom of Clouds and the Kingdom of Wars, respectively. With the addition of the divine kingdom of the sword, Watson had 3 ways to create a heavenly realm. Watson had that feeling when he was fighting Sword St. Reed. Those 2 Starlight tier weapons could allow people who had not practiced to control 2 godly kingdoms out of thin air. It was evident how powerful they were. What level are those weapons? Could it be? While Watson was lamenting the power of the Starlight tier weapons, the people around him were dumbfounded and speechless. When they saw the aura emitted by the 2 weapons that Watson had created, they knew that those weapons were not inferior to the King of Time puppet that he had fused. Perhaps, they might even be stronger. The King of Time puppet was already a peak diamond tier puppet. If those two weapons had stronger defenses, would it not be at Starlight tier? Many people had that thought in their minds, but they did not dare to say it. Starlight tier was the god's domain. Was it possible for a platinum tier youth bridled with anti-magic materials to create a tool of that tier with just a wave of his hand? While everyone was puzzled, a wave of exclamations suddenly came from the entire courtyard. Clothes. Where are my clothes? I don't have any weapons either. Those exclamations came from the 1,000 gold tier guards in the courtyard. Initially, they were all equipped with weapons and armor of the same level as Watson. However, the weapons and armor on their bodies had disappeared. Those items had become the tools on Watson's body and in his hands. The guards were naked, so they could only crouch on the ground and cover their private parts as they blushed. They had completely lost the ability to fight. He confused hundreds of puppets and even clothes and weapons. What exactly is that? Armin's eyes flickered. He had wanted to make peace with Watson because of that magic. It seemed like the magic that Watson had mastered could be used on puppets and all other aspects. Watson could fuse a tool they assumed to be Starlight tier with just 1,000 gold tier tools. If Watson had more tools, he would definitely be able to fuse a tool guaranteed to be at Starlight tier. The Starlight tier was connected to the Divine Realm. If they could obtain such items and let the Campbell family research them, it would not be a problem for the Holy Dragon Kingdom to advance 100 years. The Campbell family would receive countless honors and rewards from His Majesty for that. Armand breathed laboredly, and his body burned as he thought about that. He no longer saw Watson as an enemy who had defeated his grandson. Watson was a treasure. DMN it. How did that kid do it? That magic looks so evil. Was it some kind of magic that can cause people to hallucinate? Are we all in an illusion now? Newman snapped back to his senses and muttered to himself. Then, he shouted, General Hone, please help us. We can't let that kid continue to be so arrogant. Quote, whether it was an illusion or not, Watson had easily stopped 1,000 gold tier guards. It was hard to imagine that Watson was so strong that he could use such a level of magic while wearing anti-magic materials. Watson, I'm sorry, Hone said. The general released a platinum tier fighting technique. Contract to an inch. The distance between him and Watson was immediately shortened. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of Watson. He raised his right hand and clenched it into a fist, smashing on Watson's head. Hone said, Watson, you've gone a little too far. You should rest now. Platinum tier fighting technique, Heaven's Bane. The blue sky above Hone's head suddenly collapsed, and the ground beneath his feet also collapsed. Countless pieces of gravel flowed against the current, condensing into a thick slice of land in the sky and falling on Watson's head. In the courtyard, many members of the Campbell family felt that the space above their heads darkened. They were so frightened that their faces paled, and they subconsciously retreated far away. Using the earth as the sky, turning the world upside down. General Hone is indeed worthy of being the kingdom's protection. That move is not inferior to a peak platinum tier spell. However, General Hone, why are you attacking me? Don't you intend to investigate the grudge between Augustus and me and clear my name? Watson did not move in response to Hone's attack. His body creaked under the powerful pressure. Ignoring Watson's taunts, Hone silently increased the power of Heaven's Bane. He had no intention of proving Watson's innocence anyway. His Majesty had given him a mission to send Watson to the Campbell family, and he had no choice but to carry it out. He had deceived Watson because he did not want to have a feud with Master Antonio and Sword St. Reed. However, Watson had fused with a peak diamond tier puppet and created an item suspected to be Starlight tier. If that continued, who knew what Watson would do? When that time came, it would be very difficult to restrain Watson. Rumble, rumble. The earth above his head fell faster and faster, producing a loud rumble. It was about to collide with the ground, and Watson would be crushed into meat paste in the middle. Right at that moment, the anti-magic shackles on Watson's limbs broke and turned into fragments. Watson, who had freed himself from the shackles, raised his right hand and aimed it at the top of his head. Diamond tier fighting technique, Invincible Fist. With a punch, he was invincible. The overturned earth cracked open in the middle of a huge fist print that stretched for 100 meters. Then, the crack spread in all directions, turning the thick earth into dust. Then, it degraded into earth elements and disappeared into the air. The clouds also cracked, revealing a vast fistprint that did not dissipate for a long time. The impact made Hone retreat more than 10 steps backward, and he looked as if he was suffocating. You broke free from the control of the anti-magic materials. That is impossible. And that power. What tier are you? Nothing is impossible, General Hone. Ordinary people find it impossible to resist anti-magic materials, but for me, they are just slightly heavier toys. As for my tier, General Hone, why don't you experience it yourself? Watson stepped on the broken shackles on the ground and strode in front of Hone. He grabbed the sword of strife and waved it gently. Sword or a typhoon. A terrifying storm immediately occupied the entire Campbell family courtyard. A dark cloud had appeared in the sky out of nowhere. It was formed by sword aura, eliminating all rules other than sword techniques and wind elemental rules. The wind from the sword aura covered all directions. At the same time, the wind contained the aura of death and war had black and red colors. Peak Platinum Tier Fighting Technique, the Kingdom's Iron Wall. Hone crouched and inserted his hands into the ground. Layers of thick and heavy earth walls rose in front of him, spreading out in all directions with him in the center. The earthen walls were at least 100 meters tall. They looked very similar to the 9 ring-shaped walls that surrounded the entire royal city. That made people wonder if that man constructed the wall surrounding the capital. The kingdom's iron wall could cover a city with its most extensive range, which was not weak. However, in the face of Watson's sword or a typhoon, one would think it was a little weak. One of the fighting techniques was Diamond Tier, while the other one was Platinum Tier. One involved rules while the other one did not. In addition to that, Watson had a Starlight Tier weapon, so the result was obvious. The seemingly indestructible wall lost its fusion in the storm, turning into a pile of scattered sand that fell to the ground. The sword aura also destroyed Hone's heavy armor, and cracks appeared one after another. Even the solid muscles wrapped in the combat aura under the armor were cut, and blood oozed from the wound. Wow! Hone spat out a mouthful of blood. He could no longer support his arms, and he fell to the ground. Watson retracted the sword of strife, and stepped on the lingering sword aura to reach Hone. He walked past him without stopping. Hone's lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but he did not say anything. The pain numbed his brain, and in his daze, he seemed to see Watson's figure elongate continuously. It overlapped with a figure that was known as the strongest swordsman in the kingdom. That kid is a Diamond Tier elite, and it doesn't look like he has just advanced. Hone's face was bitter, but his heart was in turmoil. From their brief encounter, he had confirmed Watson's strength. Watson's sword had given him the feeling that he was facing Sword St. Reed. He had to be a Diamond Tier elite, and it was not an ordinary Diamond Tier warrior. He defeated General Hone? Watson heard the murmurs of shock from all around him. He did not pay them any attention. Instead, he went to Newman and snapped his fingers. Peak Platinum Tier Spell, Super Black Hole. The King of Time puppet, pulled into the endless void by the void whistle, suddenly appeared in the opening. The black hole connected to Watson's back, and a crack appeared behind him. The King of Time appeared out of thin air, and the solid ice hanging on it began to thaw. After losing the sealing object, the 3 void whistles lost contact with each other. Just as they were about to fly back to Newman and the other 2, Watson reached out and caught them first. Playing with the 3 void whistles, Watson turned his head to look at Armand, whose expression had darkened. Master Armand, should we continue with the deal we mentioned earlier? I wanted 10 holy relics in exchange for that puppet, but you disagreed. Since that's the case, the price now is 20 holy relics for that puppet. We can count these void whistles as one. Quote, Watson, 20 holy relics is too much. It's very difficult for me to take it out. Can't you reduce the amount? Armand did not expect Watson to break free from the control of the anti-magic shackles and proceeded to defeat Hone. His lips twitched. If he had known Watson was so powerful, he would not have listened to Newman. He glared at his second son. Augustus had started the fight, and coupled with Newman's poor performance, made him somewhat dissatisfied with his family. 30 holy relics. You, 40. Watson, we can't even take out 30 holy relics, let alone 40 of them. If you raise the price like that, then we won't be able to do business anymore. He had a temper, and he felt like Watson was bullying him. Did Watson really think that he did not care about his reputation? Master Armand, are you sure? Watson brandished the sword of strife in front of him, and with a crack, the entire courtyard was split into two. The sword aura rushed through the night. The sky fell, and the ground sank several inches. Some of the people on the field sat on the ground timidly. Some of their faces were pale, and their legs were trembling. Armand's expression did not change. He turned around and looked at Watson with a stern face. Watson, are you threatening me? With a slash of his sword, he sank to the ground. Even if he did not use the fusion technique, Watson's strength alone would be enough to defeat all the people in the manor. One person against an entire family. At the same time, he could not help but grumble in his heart. What kind of monster did His Majesty want him to deal with? If he had known that Watson was so strong, he would not have agreed to the king's request in the first place. No, that was a threat. This one is a threat. Watson shook his head, raised the sword of strife in his hand, and released the Starlight Tier weapon's unique skill, the Kingdom of Wars. In an instant, a desolate bronze kingdom appeared in the sky. The domain was filled with blood-stained weapons, and more blood seeped from within it. The moment that divine realm appeared, the entire Campbell Manor, from the servants to Armand, all of them knelt on the ground in fear. Only Watson stood in the manor with the divine kingdom above his head. At that moment, Watson, who was wearing the celestial feathered toby and holding the sword of strife, was no different from a real god. Everyone looked at Watson with fear in their eyes. They engraved the young man's heroic bearing in their minds. They realized that they could not capture Watson. He had broken free from the anti-magic shackles, and he went there by himself. If he was not satisfied, he only needed one sword strike to wipe out everyone in the manor. As they looked at the divine kingdom emitting a divine radiance and the aura of death, everyone felt as if their throats were being strangled. They did not doubt the power of that heavenly realm. At the same time, they understood Watson's request for a trade, and they could not refuse him. Chapter 388. The Return of the Severed Fingers Gang's Higher-Ups. Watson, can you repeat what you just said? Armand knelt on one knee. He decided to endure the humiliation, so he raised his head and asked Watson that question. As one of the three archdukes, it was shameful to kneel before a teenager in front of so many people. He was not the only one who felt that way. Most of the Campbell family members also had the same thought. Everyone respected them wherever they went. That was the first time they had to kneel in front of ordinary people. Master Armand, it wasn't a threat. That's what counts. Quote, not that sentence, but the one before that. I said I want 40 holy relics. Deal. Armand immediately agreed, which stunned Watson for a moment. Before he could say anything, Newman said, Father, why did you agree to it? We only have about 20 holy relics in our family. Where do we get 40? Shut up. If you don't have them, then go out and buy them. If you really can't do it, then you'll have to borrow enough holy relics from others to give to Watson. Otherwise, do you have a better idea? Watson had only wanted 10 holy relics. It's all your fault for making Hone interfere in this. If Watson wasn't angered, would demand 40 holy relics from us? Armand roared at his second son like an angry lion. Newman, who had been scolded, looked aggrieved. He looked at Hone, who was also half kneeling on the ground nearby, with blood dripping from the corner of his lips. How would he know that Hone, the only platinum tier elite in the kingdom and known for the kingdom's iron walls, would not be able to defeat a teenager? He thought they could get the puppet for free when they defeated Watson. He had done it for the family. Who would have thought that things would turn out like that? Newman could not vent his anger on Hone because of the man's special status. He could only turn his head to look at Augustus, who was not far away from him. Augustus, who had been lying on the ground since the start, did not say a word. Augustus, you idiot, who told you to provoke Watson? Look at how angry you've made your grandfather. If you had not provoked Watson, would we be kneeling here now? You useless thing, think of a way to appease your grandfather. Father, what? Quickly think of where to get 40 holy relics. If this matter is not resolved properly, your grandfather doesn't even have to do anything. I'll teach you a lesson personally. After being scolded by Newman, Augustus clenched his teeth. His face was full of grievance. Armand could vent his anger on Newman, and in turn, Newman vented on him. However, he had nowhere to vent his fury. Watson had severely beaten him. He had already suffered physical pain. He thought that after informing his father and grandfather, they would punish Watson on his behalf. He had not expected that he would be the one to be punished in the end. It would have been better if Watson did not go there. He would be the only person injured. However, it looked like he had implicated the whole family. Young Master Watson, on behalf of the Campbell family, I shall agree to your request. However, at the moment, we only have 24 holy relics. You will need to wait for the remaining holy relics. We will give them to you when we get them from the black market or through other channels. If you are worried, we can sign a contract. After reprimanding his son, Armand turned around and spoke politely to Watson. Of course, I don't need to worry about Master Armand's promise, so let's not delay any further. Let's sign the contract now. Watson raised his right hand. The kingdom of wars above his head dissipated. At the same time, a gentle breeze spread rapidly in all directions, with him as the center. Everyone in the courtyard stood up and heaved a sigh of relief. What are you standing there for? Newman, why aren't you drawing up a contract? Armand roared at Newman. Newman did not move. Instead, he shouted at Augustus, who was still lying on the ground. Didn't you hear that, Augustus? Your grandfather wants you to draw up a contract. Quote, Father. Augustus laid paralyzed on the ground. His face was full of pain. Watson had broken all his limbs. He could not even stand up, let alone drawing up a contract. It was too difficult for him to do that. When he saw his son like that, Newman could not bear it. He sighed and walked toward the manor. After a while, he walked out with a few thick parchments. It was a contract that stated Watson would give the puppet he fused to the Campbell family in exchange for 40 holy relics. After checking that there were no problems with the contract, Watson and Armand wrote their names on them. Watson, the contract has been signed. The 24 holy relics are being prepared right now. They will be delivered to your current residence in a moment. If there is nothing else, you can go back, Armand said tentatively as he put down the quill pen. A few minutes ago, he thought he could not let Watson leave without completing His Majesty's order. He had changed his mind. He could not wait for Watson to go away. Master Armand is right. I should leave, but I am a fair person. Since you can't pay me all the remuneration in one go, then I can't give you the complete King of Time puppet that I promised. The corner of Watson's lips rose. He raised his right hand at the puppet that had been pulled back from the void. His palm was wrapped in a layer of sharp sword aura as he swung it down. Platinum tier fighting technique, infinite sword slash. With a swoosh, dense sword energy emerged from Watson's palm. Like a tidal wave, it rushed toward the puppet's chest. The whole puppet was split into two, and half of it was used by Watson's magic. Then, it was placed in front of the ashen-faced Armand. The 40 holy relics are for a complete puppet, so 20 will get you half of it. Master Armand, am I fair? When you gather the remaining holy relics, I'll give you the other half of the puppet as well. Yes, that's fair. Armand looked at half of the puppet's body in front of him. His nose almost went crooked from anger. He had thought of giving Watson a portion of the holy relics for the puppet, while the remaining holy relics would be delayed. In any case, the contract he had signed with Watson only said that he had to give Watson 40 holy relics. It did not say when he would give them to Watson. However, Watson had made such a move, so he had no other choice. Half of the King of Time's puppet could not even display half of its peak diamond tier strength. On the contrary, the puppet would be equivalent to scrap metal after it was cut open. He would have traded more than 20 holy relics for a pile of trash. Armand's heart was bleeding. However, after looking at Watson's celestial feather robe that was emitting divine light and the red and black longsword in his right hand that was also emitting a terrifying divine aura, he gave up the thought of resisting. If he did not agree, Watson would force him to agree. The young man might even ask for a higher price. It seemed like he had no other choice but to listen to Watson. Looks like Master Armand doesn't have any objections to that. That is great. I'll take that half of the puppet back with me. Goodbye. Watson smiled politely at Armand. Then, he looked around and bowed to every single nobleman from the Campbell family. Then, he beckoned with his finger. He threw the remaining half of the diamond tier puppet into a black hole that had suddenly appeared. No one knew where he teleported the puppet. Then, Watson clapped his hands and left in satisfaction. After he left, the entire Campbell manor was still silent. Everyone looked at the mess in the manor and the half puppet in front of Armand. No one knew what to say. The first person who broke the silence was Hone. After he stood up from the ground, he swept the dust off his armor and wiped the blood from the corner of his lips. Master Armand, please allow me to apologize for this matter. I did not expect Watson to be so strong that he could even break free from the anti-magic shackles. It seems like I'll have to put more powerful shackles on him next time. I have to report to His Majesty about what happened here, so I'll take my leave first. Wait, General Hone, if you want to meet His Majesty, please bring me with you, Armand said in a hoarse voice. The half-puppet was like a clown's smiling face, mercilessly laughing at his stupidity. He had to listen to Watson when the young man was there. When Watson was gone, he thought of another way to cut his losses, King Landhar III. It was the king who ordered him to capture Watson and kill him. Since the matter had developed to that extent, the king must take responsibility for it. Wait a moment, Master Armand. I don't think there's a need to see His Majesty. It is just a fight between children. It shouldn't be played up at all. What do you think? A magnetic voice sounded, interrupting Armand's thoughts. 3 figures appeared in the sky. The leader was a platinum-haired youth holding a magic staff, and a man with long yellow hair was next to him. He was wearing a training suit. Those 2 men were Antonio and Reed, and behind them was Reed's daughter, Christina. The 3 of them landed in the courtyard leisurely. When they saw the miserable nobleman and the devastated land, Antonio behaved as if he was used to it. His expression was calm while Reed and Christina secretly clicked their tongues. Watson fought against the whole family by himself? And he left unscathed? Is he still human? Christina laughed in her heart. They had arrived for a while. Christina had found Antonio and Reed shortly after she left Watson's side. The 2 older men immediately went to Campbell Manor with her. They saw thousands of soldiers in gold-tier armor and wielding gold-tier weapons surrounded Watson. Even Hone and Newman, who was holding a holy relic, were there. Faced with those people's encirclement and Watson wearing anti-magic materials, Christina was anxious and wanted to rush out to save Watson when she realized that he was in anti-magic shackles and those people had surrounded him. However, Antonio stopped her and said, "Calm down, it's not time to do that yet." At that time, Christina did not understand what Antonio meant, but she understood then. Watson did not need their help at all. They could only wait for Watson to leave and help him to appease the Campbell family. That little monster had only learned the Kingdom of the Swords during the day. But he managed to create 2 Starlight-tier weapons and armor just now. He had a skill that was similar to the Kingdom of the Swords. I must get my hands on them and take a good look. Perhaps I can get him to make one for me as well. Reed pondered that, as a sword saint, he had already reached the level where he could unleash destructive power even if he did not have a weapon. He announced to the public that he had reached the highest tier by showing them that he did not need a sword in his hand. His every move was a sword. However, he knew that an elite of his level was not suited for a platinum-tier weapon. That was why he did not use one. He knew that his strength would increase if he had a diamond-tier weapon that he could use. Master Antonio, Master Sword Saint, and Lady Swordmistress, do you intend to stand up for Watson and make our family admit our bad luck? Armand no longer acted arrogantly in front of the 2 kingdoms' important figures, and his expression became much more polite. Don't worry, Armand, Reed and I are not unreasonable. However, it was Augustus who provoked my disciple. Of course, it was not right for Watson to destroy more than half of the Campbell Manor, so I'm willing to take on the restoration work for the building. With Reed and I here, it will only take a few hours to repair that place. Or do you really have to tell His Majesty about this matter? Fix the manor then. Also, please tell Watson that we can give him the 40 holy relics that he asked for. However, he must give us the remaining half of the puppet. If he can do that, then I'll let this go. Sure, Antonio nodded. That group of people was the kingdom's elites. They had settled the matter with just a few simple words. Then they chatted in detail about the manor's restoration work and the exchange of the puppets for the holy relics. Antonio and the other 2 spent a few hours repairing the damaged manor and courtyard. They took the 24 holy relics that Armand had prepared before leaving Campbell Manor. Armand's eyes flickered when they left, and his expression was uncertain. His eldest son, McGee, took the opportunity to come to his side. He asked softly, "Father, are we going to let them leave just like that? Our family has always claimed that we have 24 holy relics." Of course, we have more than that, but the loss will greatly reduce our strength and even make us stagnate on the road of researching magical tools. What can we do if we don't let them go? One is the astrologer, Antonio, responsible for the kingdom's transportation, and the other is the strongest sword saint in the Holy Dragon Kingdom. You can try to stop them if you want. I didn't expect Antonio and Reed to make a move simultaneously for the sake of Watson. That was an incredible thing. Both of them have many disciples, and I've never heard of them being tough on any of them. They even dared to offend me, one of the 3 archdukes. It seems that Watson is very important in their hearts. Armand looked at Augustus, who was still lying on the ground like a pile of mud. Watson and Augustus were both geniuses of the younger generation. He thought that his grandson was very outstanding and was a talent who could inherit the family business. However, Augustus was nothing compared to Watson. The latter could already fight against their family at his age, but Augustus could not even defeat Hone. It was really infuriating to compare them. Don't spread what happened here today. If I notice anyone mentioning this outside, I will strangle him to death and turn his body into a puppet. Do you understand me? Yes, master, we understand. Armand's gaze contained a terrifying thought. Everyone trembled and lowered their heads. Armand was delighted with everyone's reaction. He looked at half a puppet on the ground. Even though Antonio and Reed had taken almost all of their holy relics, Armand was not too upset. That was because half a puppet had a higher level of mystery. It was clearly the product of a fusion of a gold-tier puppet, but it had the quality of a diamond-tier item. Furthermore, the clock of life was also fused with the puppet. At that moment, he could not even find a fragment of the clock of life in the remains. If only he could dissect that puppet and create a peak diamond-tier puppet that was similar to it. Armand's thoughts drifted far away. He could not help but breathe heavily. If he could really do that, the Campbell family would stand at the peak of the kingdom. There was no doubt about that. On the other side, after Watson left Campbell Manor, he had wanted to return to the Sword Saint's courtyard. However, he received a call from a member of the Severed Fingers gang, asking him to head to the Triangle Cat Tavern. The man told him that the other remaining higher-ups had already returned to the royal city. All right, I got it. I'll head there now. Watson began to head to the Three-Legged Cat Tavern. At that moment, there were many people outside the tavern. A group of muscular men with missing fingers and fierce faces formed a sharp contrast to the people in front of them. The former were the subordinates of the higher-ups who had just arrived in the capital, and the latter were Count Grey, Snake, and Marcus's subordinates. The scene inside the tavern was completely different from the outside. All the tables and chairs in the tavern were pushed aside, leaving only a huge round wooden table in the middle. 10 people sat around the table, 5 people on the left and 5 on the right. Those 10 people were the Severed Fingers gang's founders. At that moment, those 10 people were having an intense discussion. Chapter 389, 3 Chances. It's been a long time since I've returned to the capital. I feel that the environment here has changed quite a bit. How should I put it? I feel like the people here lack a sense of danger. Even our Severed Fingers gang members are like that. Don't you think so, Donder? A muscular half-naked man sat on the second seat on the right side of the round table. His hair was squarish, and his body had some black patterns which looked like tattoos. The muscular man's name was Basher. He was known as the right middle finger among the gang members, and he was in the violence trade. As the name implied, he was a bodyguard for those who needed him. Occasionally, he would also take on some dirty jobs that involved killing people. At that moment, Basher revealed a playful smile to Donder, who was sitting behind the counter and making drinks. When I came to the capital a few years ago, Donder, you were still a cripple. How did your leg get healed in such a short time? Also, how did your missing ring finger get healed? Do you know what you look like now? You look like a pile of fat lying on a chopping board, waiting to be slaughtered. Basher, don't go overboard with your words. Actually, we should be happy for Donder since his fingers and legs are healed. We should be happy for him. After all, no one else would know about his past as our member since his fingers are healed. He could leave us and go back to being an ordinary person. A charming woman with heavy makeup sat to the right of Basher. She looked to be in her 30s, and there was a long pearl necklace hanging around her neck that was connected in the shape of a spider web. That woman was the gang's right index finger. She was in the casino and banking trade. She had control over nearly a third of the casinos in the entire kingdom. She also owned several banks in the kingdom with hundreds of millions of gold coins capital. The woman was ruthless, too. That was why she was known as the Black Widow. Veronica, what do you mean by that? There is only one way to break away from the severed fingers, and that is death. Do you want Donner to die like an ordinary person? Your words are even more sarcastic than Basher's. Another woman sat opposite Veronica. She took off the hood of her large cloak, revealing a beautiful face. If Watson were there, he would definitely recognize that woman as the owner of the Floating City's Iris Flower Tavern, Elvin. Since when do you get to interrupt me? You are only the left pinky, which means you have the lowest status. So, just listen obediently. I heard that the sea folks had destroyed the Floating City's industry, and more than half your slaves had run away. We know you'll be handing in the least amount of money at the end of the year. I'm not even sure you'd get to keep your position as a leader with the gang this time. If I were you, I would not even attend this meeting. I would find a place to bury myself. Veronica glanced at Elvin with obvious disdain in her eyes. The Severed Fingers gang respected the right hand, and their status would get lower sequentially, from the thumb to the pinky. The thumb was in the business of selling military equipment and hiding military funds. The index finger was in the business of underground casinos and bank loans, which were linked to money. As for the middle finger, he would say that he was in the business of selling violence and killing people. The ring finger and little finger were the most tiring positions, and they earned the least. The former had to sell inferior goods and fake alcohol at a high price, while the latter managed a network of slaves and trained them to be proper servants to sell to the noblemen. They could also be supplied to the higher-ups in the gang. As the right index finger, Veronica's underground casino had a cash flow of tens of millions. Those who borrowed money from her bank were secretly executed when they could not repay the loan. They would sell their properties, children, and even valuable parts of their bodies. That would also allow them to make a lot of money. Compared to Elvin, who had to work hard all the time, Veronica could earn money by snapping her fingers. That was why she looked down on Elvin. Elvin did not get angry at Veronica, who mocked her. She said quietly, "That is none of your business. I hope you can maintain that attitude when Master arrives." Quote, "What Master? Elvin, are you talking about the guy who claimed to be the Black Emperor who's controlling the Severed Fingers gang? I don't know who gave that guy the confidence to do that. He only managed to rope in a few low-tier leaders from the Severed Fingers gang, and he thought that he could control us. Elvin, I heard that you had contact with that guy in the Floating City. Don't tell me that the batch of slaves that you kidnapped are in the hands of that guy? The Severed Fingers gang has always been a team of 10 people. We are all the leaders of this organization. There is no distinction between our ranks. Now, a random person from an unknown place wants to control the Severed Fingers gang. I disagree with this. The person to control me must be someone stronger than me. As for you guys, if any of you want to be ruled by that Black Emperor guy, then hand over your assets and get out of the Severed Fingers gang as soon as possible. Otherwise, don't blame me for not being polite when the time comes." Basher, who had just spoken, raised his legs and placed them on the table. He cracked his knuckles. "I am also one of the Black Emperor's followers." "Basher, are you talking about me?" Marcus, sitting on the right, tilted his head and narrowed his eyes with an honest expression. Killing intent poured from his eyes. "That's right, I'm talking about you. Marcus, you should have given up your position a long time ago. Since the kingdom hasn't had any conflicts with another kingdom, the budget allocated to the army has lessened. In fact, the money you earn is even less than the money from the banks and casinos. I think you should just give up your title and give it to the right index finger. Of course, if you want to be demoted to the middle finger, I have no objections to that. After all, I have wanted to try out the thumb position for a long time." Basher did not show any signs of fear. Instead, he fearlessly retorted back, "No matter how little money the kingdom has allocated to the army, it is still more than what you earn by killing people. Furthermore, under the leadership of the Black Emperor, we no longer need to steal military funds to make profits. We have other methods. What is this method of earning money without stealing military funds? Don't tell me you're begging in the streets? That could earn quite a lot of money. I can already imagine you, the deputy director of the city defense department, kneeling and crawling on the streets." Marcus and Basher continued to exchange words. The atmosphere there was a little tense. At that moment, an old man in a tuxedo and a polite demeanor coughed. "Everyone, let's not quarrel for now. We're all members of the Severed Fingers gang, so it's best if we stay amiable. It's not easy for the gang to get to where we are today. After all, we're an underground force that the kingdom's higher-ups regard as a thorn in their side. If we have internal strife before they arrive, then what can we do about it? You don't want to be split up because of a small matter and then be wiped out by the kingdom in one fell swoop, right?" Quote. After the old man spoke, Marcus and Basher, who were arguing, stopped talking. It was obvious that they understood that, as expected of Mr. Klein, left index finger. "Your words are powerful. I very much agree with what you said, but I have a small question. I want to know what you, the Severed Fingers gang leaders, have experienced while we were working hard to earn money all over the kingdom. If it's convenient, you can tell me how the Black Emperor subdued all of you, and how many of our men here are followers of the Black Emperor. If you can't tell me that, then I'm afraid that meeting can't go on." The person who spoke was a relatively young child who looked to be in his teens. He was sitting in the left middle finger seat. That young man had a baby face. He looked older than his appearance, but he was not more than 18. However, his body had a long-lasting murderous and terrifying aura at the peak of gold tier. The young man's name was Aemon. He was abandoned in the slums of the royal city when he was only a baby. Later, he joined the Severed Fingers gang and gradually rose to prominence. He replaced the previous left middle finger and became the new leader. Not many people would know his name. However, when they mentioned his nickname, Bloody Executioner, then everyone in the entire assassin world would know about him. Anyone targeted by the Bloody Executioner, regardless of their identity or status, would have their head hacked off and die an unnatural death. After Aemon asked his question, the scene fell into a short silence. Then, as the leader on the right, Marcus said, "All our gang members in the capital believe in the Black Emperor. As for what we have experienced, I think you will understand when the Black Emperor arrives. When that time comes, you will be like us, his devout believers. I can guarantee it. Stop bullsh *TTING. If that Black Emperor comes here, I will be the first to break his head and stuff it into his butt. That will sober you up." Basher let out a prideful and weird laugh. "Shut up." Elvin suddenly stood up and slammed her right hand on the table. Her palm sank into the table. "If you dare to speak rudely of the Black Emperor again, I will let you experience the feeling of having your head broken and stuffed into your butt." Elvin, who had not reacted to Veronica's taunts earlier, exploded when she heard Basher's words about the Black Emperor. Basher looked at the combat aura condensed on Elvin's palm. Surprisingly, he did not refute it. Instead, he sat up straight and frowned as if he had discovered something that surprised him. "Your combat aura strength is higher than usual. Gold tier? No, I feel like it's higher. When did you become so powerful, Elvin?" While Basher was mumbling in his heart, Veronica took out a small mirror from her bosom and started to dress up in front of the mirror. She said, "The right thumb, Marcus, the ring finger, Count Grey, and the left and right pinkies, Elvin and Snick. This means that, at the moment, close to half of the Severed Fingers gang's higher-ups are under the Black Emperor. This situation is really worrying. I'm here to confirm how many of us have defected. Since I've confirmed it, I won't be staying here anymore. The Campbell family is organizing a ball, and I can't miss it." As she spoke, Veronica stood up from her seat, followed by Basher. "I'm not staying here anymore. He gathered us here but didn't show up. This Black Emperor is really arrogant. Anyway, from today onward, the Severed Fingers gang no longer exists. You traitors had better disappear from the kingdom. Otherwise, when I'm in a bad mood one day, I'll send someone to kill all of you." Looks like the next gathering, the Severed Fingers gang's higher-ups will change from 10 people to 6 people. Other than Marcus and the other Severed Fingers higher-ups also stood up and prepared to leave the Three-Legged Cat Tavern. At that moment, the tavern door opened. A youth in a feathered coat and holding a black and red longsword walked into the room. The moment he entered, the kid looked around him. A smile appeared on his tender face. 1, 2, 10. It looks like everyone is here. I didn't expect the higher-ups to respect me enough to be here. I did wonder about that when I heard about the gathering. I had planned to eliminate that person along with their businesses if they did not come. Since all of you are here, then I don't need to do that. Of course, that was Watson. As he spoke, he walked to the head of the round conference table. Marcus immediately stood up and gave him the seat. At the same time, he respectfully knelt on one knee and said, "Greetings to the Black Emperor." At the same time, Count Grey, Snick, and Elvin also stood up and knelt on one knee to show their respect to Watson. "My honorable master, you are finally here." After sitting down on Marcus's seat, Watson placed the Sword of Strife on the table. Donder, who had been hiding behind the counter to accompany the guests, immediately ran out. He put an empty wine glass in front of Watson and poured some red wine into it. "Master Black Emperor, please have a drink." The Black Emperor that those people were talking about was actually a teenager? Less than a minute had passed since Watson had arrived, and the several higher-ups knelt on the floor. Donder poured the wine, and the other Severed Fingers gang's higher-ups looked shocked. They had previously tried to imagine the Black Emperor, who subdued Marcos and the others. They thought the person would have an aggressive appearance or looked dignified and meticulous. They did not expect to see a teenager instead. **CKER. A child defeated you? Are you kidding me? This is a mockery. I'm not playing this game." The first to react was Basher. He spat on the ground, turned around, and walked out of the tavern. He felt that he had been insulted. If Marcus and the others were defeated by a seemingly powerful person or were simply bribed by wealth, he would understand it. However, Watson did not do either of those. That young person was only 12 or 13 years old. He might not even hit puberty yet. A group of adults respected such a person. Just thinking about it made him feel cheap and ridiculous. "Wait a minute, your name is Basher, right? I heard that you lost the right middle finger. You do business by killing people, but you never do it yourself. Instead, you arrange for someone else to do it, and you rarely fail. I'm interested in you. Do you want to consider staying? I'll give you a better job and a better reward." Just as Basher was about to leave, a young voice suddenly sounded from behind him, causing him to stop in his tracks. "Yes, my name is Basher. What do you want? I'm not as easy to fool as Marcus and Elvin. I only believe in strength. If you want me to stay, you have to use your strength. Do you have it?" Basher turned around and looked at Watson with contempt. "Little brat, I advise you to go home and play in the mud. Being the boss of others is not a game. You can't do it." Quote, "Black Emperor, Basher has been so disrespectful to you. Do you want me to help you teach him a lesson?" Elvin, who was half kneeling on the ground, suddenly raised her head and asked coldly. After Watson fused Elvin, her strength had increased to diamond tier, while Basher was only at the peak of gold tier. She could send Basher flying with a flick of her finger if she wanted to do that. "Elvin, you don't have to do anything. A leader who can't convince his subordinates is not a good leader. Since Mr. Basher doubts my ability, then I'll prove it to him." Watson picked up the red wine in front of him and drank it in one gulp. He stood up and faced Basher. "You said that you believe in strength. If I'm stronger than you, will you acknowledge me as your boss? Why don't we make a bet? I'll stand here and let you fight me. If you can make me move one step, then you win. I'll give you 3 chances. Kid, I think you're courting death. I only need one punch to rip your head off." Balsa snorted coldly and strode toward Watson. His body was burning with a fiery red combat aura. Gold tier fighting technique, Blazing Lion. A flaming lion appeared behind him. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it pounced toward Watson. In an instant, it pressed Watson under its body. The blazing flames not only burned the air, but even the ground was charred and melted. Reincarnate as a better person in your next life. Don't be so pretentious, or else you'll be burned to death again. When Watson's figure disappeared under the raging flames, Basher was certain that he would definitely die. He smiled contemptuously. However, the technique used to release the fighting technique is not bad, but the fighting technique itself has some flaws. Watson's voice echoed from within the flames. Following that, the raging flames withdrew from his body and were sucked into his mouth, revealing Watson's appearance. Regardless of whether it was his clothes or his face, he looked refreshed. Clearly, he was completely unharmed in the flames just now. "Mr. Basher, that is the first attack. You still have 2 more chances." "That's impossible," Basher cried out in shock. He did not hold back in that attack just now. He was a peak gold tier elite. How could a child like Watson possibly block his attack? Did Watson have some special armor on him? Subconsciously, his gaze fell on Watson's sparkling feather coat. "Kid, what are you wearing?" "Ah, I'm sorry. It is a starlight tier armor that I just made. You might find it difficult to attack me when I'm wearing this. I'll take it off now." As Watson spoke, he took off the feather coat and placed it on the table with the sword of strife. "Starlight tier armor? And you made it? Kid, I think you've lost your mind." "Die." Not believing a single word Watson said, Basher came in front of Watson and raised his right leg above Watson's head. Then, he fell. The combat aura on his leg was sharper than a razor, but before it could touch Watson's body, the ground beneath his feet was shattered by the combat aura, leaving a deep hole. The highest item that one could make in the entire Holy Dragon Kingdom was Platinum tier, as all Diamond tier items were relics left behind by previous civilizations. As for Starlight tier items, there were none. Such things were called the divine artifacts, and it was already ridiculous for them to appear anywhere in the world. However, Watson said that he was the one who made that defensive item. Was he crazy enough to think that he was a god? With contempt in his heart, Basher's right leg did not hold back and landed heavily on Watson's head. There was a crisp crack, but Watson was unharmed. Basher's face paled. He clutched his broken right leg and fell to the ground, wailing loudly. "Mr. Basher, you still have one more chance, but it seems like you can only forfeit." Watson smoothed the messy hair on his head and looked around him. The contempt in the eyes of the gang leaders who had looked down on him a moment ago had disappeared entirely and was replaced by solemnity.